He was a monster, until one spilled glass of wine ruined his grief forever. On another hollow Thursday night, Sicily's most feared crime lord walked into a candlelit restaurant, expecting nothing but silence. But then she crashed into his table, stained his world red, and looked him in the eyes without fear. From that moment, Ronan Vale stopped being just a kingpin in mourning and became a man dangerously close to feeling alive again. And in his world, love is never a blessing. It is the first warning shot.
Heels. Case file. Ronan Vale. Subject's 3-year period of cultivated emotional anesthesia was catastrophically breached on a Thursday evening in Palermo. The stimulus, an unplanned physical interaction with a restaurant employee. Heels. The sequence of events was unremarkable, an accidental collision, a spilled glass of wine, brief eye contact, yet the subject's reaction was profound. Heels. A study of this incident reveals the inherent fragility of the megalomaniac narcissist's control mechanisms. To comprehend the rapid psychological unraveling that followed, we must first document the subject's baseline state, Heels, beginning with his unvarying Thursday ritual. The subject arrived at Osteria del Luna precisely 30 minutes post-sunset. Heels. The subject's entrance was always solitary, utilizing a secondary access point into a private room. The environment was controlled. Low lighting, minimal interaction with staff. The establishment itself, located in Palermo's oldest district, Heels, was chosen for its inconspicuous nature, a setting designed to avoid external stimuli. This pattern was maintained for 3 years, Heels, a total of 156 consecutive Thursdays following a significant traumatic event, identified as a funeral. The subject would occupy the same corner booth, a tactically superior position with clear lines of sight to both exits, Heels. The ritual itself, the meal, the specific quantity of wine, the departure, functioned as a form of psychological armor, a defense against the profound loss associated with his residential villa, Heels. The resulting numbness was a state of manufactured, predictable detachment. Safe, the proprietor, Marco, exhibited conditioned behavior, delivering the wine without verbal exchange. His expression was a carefully maintained neutral mask, Heels. Years of interaction had taught him to avoid inquiry, displays of sympathy, or any acknowledgement of the subject's palpable unresolved grief. The usual Signor Vale. A single nod was the subject's only response. Marco would withdraw, Heels. The ambient auditory stimuli from the kitchen, clanging pots, vocalizations from the staff, the sound of cooking, were processed by the subject as white noise, a meaningless soundtrack to the mechanical execution of a once meaningful routine. Heels. His mobile device vibrated. Heels. An encrypted message from his subordinate Luca. Shipment cleared. No problems. The subject's reply was terse. Good. The device was then placed face down, a symbolic termination of external demands. As he reached for his glass, Heels, the inciting incident occurred. A female employee, later identified as Elena Hart, breached the threshold from the kitchen. She was transporting soiled tableware and moving with excessive velocity, her trajectory miscalculated. Heels. The collision was inevitable. The wine glass overturned, its contents saturating the white linen with a Rorschach-like stain resembling arterial blood. The dishes rattled, but remained intact. And Elena, dark-haired, green-eyed, Heels, estimated age of 30, froze, her hands locked on the tray, her mouth forming a perfect O of clinical shock. Heels. Oh God, oh no. Motor functions returned. She set down the tray with a visible tremor and began an ineffective attempt to blot the stain with a napkin. Her verbalizations were self-directed, a frantic internal monologue spoken aloud. Heels. I wasn't supposed to come through this way. The kitchen door was stuck, and I thought I could just cut through, but clearly I'm making it worse, aren't I? Subject Vale remained motionless, observing. Heels. Most individuals who committed errors in his proximity displayed either a flight or a groveling response. This woman did neither. Her focus was entirely on the physical chaos she had created. When she finally established direct eye contact, Heels, she did not look away. I'm so sorry, she stated, her tone conveying genuine remorse. Did any of it get on your suit? No. Heels. The subject's vocalization was harsh, a sign of his disrupted state. He cleared his throat. It's definitely not fine. I just dumped wine all over your dinner. Her American accent was pronounced. Let me get Marco. Heels. He'll want to comp your meal, obviously, and I'll pay for the dry cleaning if. It's fine, Vale repeated, his tone more forceful, an attempt to reassert control over the interaction. Accidents happen. Elena paused, her frantic cleaning, feels, the napkin still clutched in her hand. For the first time, she appeared to be assessing him. Whatever she perceived in his expression caused a slight relaxation in her posture, though physiological signs of embarrassment remained. Feels. You're being way nicer about this than you should be, she observed. Feels. Most people would be screaming at me right now. I don't scream. Lucky me. She produced a small, anxious smile. Still, I feel terrible. Can I at least get you a fresh glass? Before the subject could respond, the proprietor Marco appeared. Feels, his face a mask of acute alarm, having witnessed the event. The string of rapid Italian he directed at Elena was laced with panic. While the subject did not process every word, the subtext was clear. Feels. You have just committed a grave error with the most dangerous man in Sicily. What were you thinking? That final part remained unsaid. It didn't need to be. Elena raised her hands in a placating gesture. I know. I'm sorry. It was an accident. Feels. Marco then switched to accented English, addressing Vale. Senor Vale, please accept my sincerest apologies. This is her second night. Feels. She's still learning the layout. I will of course cover the cost of Marco. Vale's voice was sharp, cutting through the proprietor's panicked state. It's fine. Get me another glass, and whatever the lady was supposed to be doing, let her get back to it. Feels. The command was absolute. Marco nodded once and retreated. Elena, however, lingered, studying the subject that was difficult to parse. It was a mixture of curiosity and perhaps suspicion. She had clearly registered Marco's terror. Feels. Second night, huh? The subject asked. She blinked, processing. What? Marco said it's your second night working here. Oh, yeah. She tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear. I just moved to Palermo last week. Feels. Needed a job. Marco needed someone who could work nights and didn't mind dealing with difficult customers. She paused. Though I'm starting to think his definition of difficult might be different from mine. The statement was a test, Feels, a verbal probe designed to classify the man she was speaking to. Smart, Vale registered, and exhibiting a level of boldness disproportionate to her situation. Where are you from? He asked. A tactical error. Feels. The question was a deviation from protocol, an extension of an interaction he should have already terminated to restore his psychological equilibrium. California, originally. Los Angeles. Elena shifted her weight, Feels, her gaze flickering toward the kitchen. Feels. But I've been moving around a lot the past few years, trying to figure out what I'm supposed to be doing with my life, you know? Vale did not know. The luxury of such uncertainty had been absent from his life for decades. He nodded regardless. Well, Feels, Elena said into the silence. I should probably get back before Marco has a stroke again. I'm really sorry about the wine, Elena. He had registered her name when Marco had uttered it in his panic, a piece of data now filed. She paused. Feels, her eyebrows arching in surprise. It's fine, Vale stated for a third time. Forget it. This time her smile was genuine, reaching her eyes. You're pretty zen for a guy who just got wine-bombed. Thanks for not getting me fired on day 2. Feels. She then retrieved her tray and exited through the kitchen doors, her movements now more deliberate. Feels. Vale was left alone with the stained linen and a novel sensation stirring in his chest. Interest. He immediately initiated suppression protocols. Feels. Attempting to lock down the feeling and redirect his focus to his phone, to the operational demands that were his baseline. Yet when Marco delivered the replacement glass of wine, Vale found himself making an inquiry. The American girl. Feels. How long is she planning to stay in Palermo? Marco's composure faltered. She seems competent despite the spill. She has good references, works hard. The proprietor hesitated. Should I? Is there a problem? Feels. No problem. Vale raised the glass, just making conversation. The fabrication felt foreign, but Marco accepted it with palpable relief before retreating. Feels. The subject consumed his wine while internally reinforcing the decision to dismiss the encounter. This event changes nothing. He reasoned that on the subsequent Thursday, he would adhere to his ritual, Feels, and the American waitress would be relegated to the status of irrelevant background stimuli. This was the subject's conscious belief. It held until the following Thursday, when Elena approached his table carrying his wine, a grin on her face, Feels, and said, No tray this time, I promise. I'm a much better waitress when I'm not barreling through forbidden doorways. On the second Thursday, the subject noted that Elena's hair was styled in a ponytail, exposing the line of her neck, Feels. She moved with a newfound confidence, her integration into the environment evident. The sound of her laughter, a response to a cook's comment, penetrated the usual ambient noise and registered in a psychic space Vale had long considered sealed. Eels. Red wine, right? She asked, approaching with the bottle. Marco said you always get the same thing. Creature of habit, Vale replied. Nothing wrong with knowing what you like. She poured the wine with a steady hand. No spillage. Though, Eels. I have to say, if you're coming to an Italian restaurant every week and only ordering wine and pasta, you're missing out on about 60% of the menu. Is that your professional opinion? Eels. That's I've been eating my way through the kitchen's experiments for 2 weeks' opinion. Elena placed the bottle on the table. Jep made this thing yesterday with squid ink and roasted peppers that legitimately changed my life. In response, Eels, the subject felt an involuntary twitch at the corner of his mouth, a micro-expression that could be classified as the precursor to a smile. Eels, high praise, an unexpected variable. The subject, Ronan, maintained a rigid adherence to routine, clear psychological defense. The server, Elena, offered a choice: maintain the pattern or deviate. Protocol dictated stasis. Eels. No engagement beyond the necessary. Yet an anomalous impulse manifested. The subject vocalized a request for her recommendation. Her response was immediate, positive reinforcement, an O, a clear indicator of surprise and pleasure. Eels. He consciously frames the interaction as a risk, a dangerous move, yet proceeds. She formalizes the arrangement, scribbling on her pad. A contract is established. If the experiment fails, he can revert to the established routine. He agrees. A deal. Eels. Another smile from her. She returns to the kitchen. The subject is left in a state of cognitive dissonance, questioning his own actions. The plan has been breached. Eels. The plan's objective was simple: observation, sustenance, withdrawal, repetition, zero emotional connect, maintain operational distance from all external actors. But Elena returns, roughly 20 minutes later, bearing handmade ravioli. Eels. The presentation is described as an act of obvious pride. The subject perceives that rejecting the offering would constitute a social violation, a crime. She establishes a condition for their continued social bond. If you don't like this, Eels, we can't be friends. We're friends, is met with an affirmation and a disclosure of her own social isolation in Palermo. She then offers him an exit, acknowledging his strong, Eels, silent archetype and permitting him to disregard her overture. His programming dictates he should terminate the interaction. Eels. He should have re-established the boundary, clarifying her misinterpretation of the dynamic. He did not. Instead, the subject engages with the new variable, the ravioli. The sensory analysis is detailed, perfect, Eels. A complex balance of flavors and textures, indicating a high level of appreciation for craftsmanship. It evokes a powerful emotional or cultural association, poetry and Italian cuisine. When questioned by Elena, Eels, his initial assessment is a muted "it's good." Her response is performative distress, a form of social manipulation to elicit a stronger reaction. It works. The subject escalates his assessment to excellent, labeling the chef Jep an artist. Eels. Satisfied, she withdraws, but not before asserting control over their next interaction. She will choose again. He posits a hypothetical, assuming I come back. Eels. Oh, you'll come back. Her certainty is absolute, delivered as a parting statement. She frames her influence as an addiction to the good stuff. Her prediction proves accurate. The subject returns for consecutive Thursdays. A pattern is not broken, Eels, but re-established with new parameters. Each week, Elena introduces novel stimuli, a new dish, a personal anecdote about navigating Palermo, a character study of the restaurant staff. Her behavior is notable. Eels. She treats him as a normative individual, disregarding the clear indicators of his true identity, an identity that induces palpable fear in other males. Eels. This behavior should have registered as an irritating breach of the subject's carefully constructed isolation, a threat to his operational security. Eels. Instead, the interactions become a weekly focal point, an hour where the subject experiences a temporary reprieve from his existential pressures. The pathology of attachment begins to manifest. By the 5th week, he alters his arrival time, Eels, arriving 15 minutes early for the purpose of observation. By the 7th, he has cataloged her personal habits, coffee preparation. By the 10th, the pretense of ordering is gone. She assumes control of his consumption, Eels, bringing him Jep's daily creation. The duration of their conversations extends, 5-minute sessions that are perceived as insufficient. One evening, Elena directly confronts his enigmatic nature, noting his handler, Marco's, anxiety. Eels. She reports Marco's description of him as an important customer. Eels. The subject is always polite. She dismisses this as irrelevant. She focuses on the fear reaction he elicits in Marco, a genuine nervousness. She struggles to articulate the source of this fear. Around men like feels. Ronan completes her sentence with clinical quietude, men like me. Her pupils narrow slightly, a physiological marker of heightened focus. She asks for classification. What kind of man are you? The honest answer is a threat vector, feels. A dishonest one would undermine the fragile, unclassified bond forming between them. He opts for a carefully constructed evasion, defining himself by his function within their shared environment, one who appreciates pasta and company. Beyond that, feels. Does it matter? She pauses, processing. The ambient sounds of the restaurant continue, a backdrop of normalcy. Feels. Life continues, oblivious to their micro-interaction. I guess not, Elena concludes. Her rationalization is simple. His behavior toward her has been exclusively positive. She categorizes him as quiet and a little bit broody, feels, but fundamentally nice. His use of broody prompts her to elaborate on his persona, the dark, mysterious man with a past. She frames it as cinematic. He questions if this is a compliment. Her answer is conditional, introducing a playful, feels, absurd hypothesis. Vampirism. For the first time, the subject exhibits a genuine smile, a significant break in his typical flat affect. The theory is dismissed. Her attention is then diverted by another table. A summons. Duty calls. Feels. She signals the conversation is not terminated. There's more to discuss. The list his tactical seating choice, facing the door, his refusal of dessert. She self-censors, labeling her own inquiries nosy. Feels. The subject issues a one-word command, ask. This surprises them both. She hesitates, then focuses on the most prominent pattern. Why Thursdays? The consistency. The subject examines his wine. The color red triggers a memory association, blood, feels, and a stain from their first night. 3 years prior, Thursdays were linked to his son, Matteo. It was their day, a shared ritual of cooking, a positive memory structure, feels. The ritual involved failure and laughter, catharsis. Then Matteo's death occurred, and the day was recontextualized. Thursdays became a forced ritual of survival, feels, a mechanism to prevent complete psychological disintegration into the violence that structured his life. He cannot disclose this data to Elena. He provides a partial truth. Routine. I like routine, feels. Her expression suggests she detects the omission but does not press for more information. Fair enough, she concedes. We all have our things. She departs. The subject is left alone, feels, processing the realization he has just engaged in a level of self-disclosure unseen in years. The act itself represents a significant risk. Feels. Dangerous, the assessment is clear. His associate, Luca, would advise immediate termination of contact. This attachment is a tactical liability in their operational environment, where weakness is fatal. Yet on the subsequent Thursday, feels, the subject returns to the Osteria della Luna at the designated time. When Elena approaches, exhibiting her characteristic warm smile and carrying a bottle of wine, the subject's risk assessment protocols fail, feels. He cannot motivate himself to care about the danger. She presents a special dish, seafood risotto, noting Geppa's experimentation with saffron. He instructs her to thank the chef. She counters, tell him yourself, feels, revealing the chef's standing invitation. Elena then takes the seat opposite him, feels. This is not a brief interaction. She is settling in for a protracted session. The kitchen is closed. The staff meal is 20 minutes out. His physiological response is noted, an accelerated pulse. He confirms he does not object to her presence, feels. She initiates an interrogation protocol, disguised as playful inquiry. Question 1. What do you actually do? She prefaces it by stating she has her own theory. He invites her to present it. Her hypothesis is binary, feels. Inherited wealth, or a business that necessitates late-night meetings and intimidation. Her analysis is surprisingly accurate. Am I close? He confirms business, keeping the details vague. Feels. Import, export. She probes for specifics. Various kinds. Her laughter indicates she recognizes the evasion. You're terrible at this. She correctly identifies that his vagueness only increases his perceived mystique. Feels. He suggests he is merely boring. She refutes this, citing Marco's fear response as contrary evidence. She then pivots, declaring his actual profession irrelevant. Her curiosity is secondary to a more critical point, feels. He is the most interesting person she has met in this city. He suggests she expand her social circle. She claims to have met many, finding most exhausting. She pauses, you're not. A definitive shift in the dynamic occurs, feels. The typical patterns of casual interaction shifted. exposing a more substantive, candid layer. The subject Ronan could perceive a breach in the psychological fortifications he had meticulously constructed. Uncharacteristically, feels, he made no immediate effort to repair them. May I pose a question, he initiated. Reciprocity is expected. The choice of Polmo, you indicated a nomadic history. Why this location? Elena's smile became tinged with introspection. To be direct, feels. I grew weary of evasion. My 20s were spent in pursuit of a prescribed life narrative, the correct profession, the optimal city, the ideal self-construct. The outcome was consistently one of disillusionment, feels. Her finger traced a geometric shape on the table linen, so I adopted a new protocol. Select an unknown territory, engage in novel behaviors, and observe the results, feels. And what are the current observations? I am spilling wine on subjects of intrigue and consuming the finest cuisine of my existence. Her gaze locked with his. The situation could be less favorable, or more, perhaps, feels. But an improved state is often overvalued. Better is frequently a synonym for continued flight. She adjusted her posture. I am tired of flight. For once, I wish to be stationary, feels. Ronan processed this sentiment with a level of understanding she could not possibly grasp. He, too, had been in a state of flight, albeit of a different nature. A flight from grief, feels, from memory, from any stimulus with the potential to penetrate his affective numbness and reactivate sensation. Then Elena had emerged through a kitchen door, collided with his table, and his flight had abruptly ceased. I should permit you to eat, feels, she stated, rising from her chair, before the meal loses its thermal integrity. Elena, feels. She paused, her expression one of inquiry. Ronan scanned his lexicon for the appropriate terminology and found it deficient. What was the correct verbalization? Thank you for reactivating my capacity for human feeling. Do not cease communication, feels. I assess you may be the most significant risk factor to my emotional stasis in years. He defaulted to a simpler, concrete observation. The result, he stated. It is satisfactory, feels. Her smile indicated she had processed the subtext of his unspoken thoughts. I will inform Jep of your approval. December commenced, feels, bringing with it cold precipitation that transformed Polmo's streets into channels and deterred tourists from the old quarter. Activity increased at Osteria de la Luna, driven by locals seeking caloric comfort and warmth, feels. But Ronan's Thursday evening table was maintained as permanently reserved, a protocol understood by the staff, without explicit instruction from Marco, feels. Elena began to wear a dark green sweater, a color that enhanced the pigmentation of her eyes. Ronan registered this data point, attempted to disregard it, and failed in a manner that was statistically significant, feels. You appear to be experiencing thermal discomfort, she noted one Thursday, placing his wine on the table. Outside, rain impacted the windows with force. A long day. A similar assessment applies here, feels. She observed him with the specific intensity she had cultivated over the preceding months. Do you wish to verbalize the source of your distress? No. Do you wish for me to provide a distraction from it? Yes, feels. Elena smiled and launched into a narrative detailing her failed attempt to navigate the Polmo bus system, which included dramatic simulations and at least 3 distinct character vocalizations. Upon its conclusion, feels, Ronan perceived a slight reduction in his shoulder tension. Is the condition improved? She inquired. Improved, feels. Excellent, because I am about to introduce a further positive variable to your evening. She extracted a small wrapped object from her apron pocket. An early Christmas present. Ronan stared at the object as if it were a potential explosive device, feels. This was not a required action. It was a desired one. Open it. The contents revealed a black leather bookmark, his initials stamped in silver foil at the top. I observed you consistently carry a book in your coat pocket, Elena explained, feels, exhibiting a sudden lack of certainty. And the corner of the current volume is showing significant wear. So I hypothesized, I don't know, that this might prove functional. If it is not to your liking, I have retained the receipt. I like it, feels. Ronan moved his thumb across the smooth texture. No one had presented him with a gift in years, feels. He could not recall the last instance of another individual noticing the minor data points of his existence. Thank you. Elena's smile of relief was potent enough to power the entire establishment. You're welcome. Merry Christmas, mysterious stranger, feels. Ronan. Pardon? My designation. It is Ronan. He had frequented this location for months, engaged in dialogues with her that varied from illogical to surprisingly profound, yet he had withheld his name, feels. He had permitted the labels you and stranger, and on occasions of bravery, Mr. Grumpy. This felt like a transgression of a boundary, allowing her possession of something authentic. Elena's expression softened. Ronin, she echoed. Heels. Testing the phonetics. It possesses a higher degree of fit than mysterious stranger. Different. More real. She extended her hand across the table. Heels. It is a pleasure to make your official acquaintance, Ronin. I am Elena. He took her hand, intending a brief, professionally appropriate gesture. But at the moment of dermal contact, a potent bioelectric current passed through him. Her hand was warm, heels, with minor calluses from her work. When she did not immediately retract it, neither did he. They remained in this state for one heartbeat longer than protocol dictated. 2, 3. Then Elena's cheeks flushed and she withdrew, clearing her throat. Heels. Right. Well, I should likely... There are tables requiring service. Elena, she halted her turn. Would you have dinner with me? The words were verbalized before Ronin could conduct a proper risk assessment. Not here. Heels. Somewhere else. A non-professional setting. Her eyes widened. Functioning as a date. If that is your desired classification. Is this your query because it is your desire, or because you perceive it to be my desire? Both. Heels. The honesty elicited a smile from her. Okay, yes, I will have dinner with you. She laughed. My God, you look terrified posing that question. I do not typically, Ronin censored himself. Do not typically what? Engage with women, heels. Allow proximity, concern himself with matters beyond survival and retribution. Date, he finished. Well, you are performing adequately thus far. Elena glanced toward Marco, who was observing them with poorly disguised interest. Heels, I am off duty on Sunday evening. Heels. Does that time frame work? I will make it work. Then it is classified as a date. She began to walk away, then executed one final turn. Hey, Ronin, yes. I am genuinely glad you did not terminate my employment that first night. Heels. Then she vanished into the kitchen, leaving Ronin with a leather bookmark, an accelerated pulse, and the alarming realization that at some point his affective numbness had completely shattered. He was experiencing sensation again, heels, desiring outcomes again, and for the first time in 3 years he could not generate any sense of regret. Sunday manifested with rare December sunlight, heels. Ronin altered his attire 4 times before selecting dark trousers and a charcoal sweater that Elena would later state made his gray eyes appear silver, heels. He retrieved her from the small apartment she leased near the university. And if his hands exerted excessive pressure on the steering wheel during the drive, she made no comment. Their destination was an establishment overlooking the sea. Quiet, heels. Elegant, but not ostentatious. The sort of restaurant where patrons spoke in low decibels and the staff moved with spectral efficiency. This is beautiful, Elena remarked, accepting the chair Ronin offered. Do you frequent this location? Heels. First time. Indeed? She appeared surprised. I would assume a local subject would know all the optimal spots. I know the functional spots, the locations where transactions are conducted. Ronin took his seat opposite her. This is different. Heels, a positive or negative variance. Heels. It is too early to determine. She laughed. A fair assessment. The waiter materialized with menus and wine suggestions. Elena placed her order in hesitant Italian, which prompted a smile of thinly veiled amusement from the waiter. After he departed, heels, she groaned. My proficiency in this language is abysmal. I have been receiving instruction, but my accent remains substandard. It is not substandard. You are being socially agreeable. I am being accurate. Ronin poured water into her glass. Heels. You are making an effort that is of greater importance than perfect execution. Is that the Ronin Veil doctrine on existence? Effort supersedes perfection. You have researched me. She had the propriety to appear marginally culpable. Heels. A small amount. Your name, let us say it maintains a significant online presence. Heels. That was a logical certainty. One does not manage half of Sicily's criminal network without creating a digital record. Even with careful countermeasures, the operative question was the extent of her findings, the depth of her knowledge. Heels. Ronin maintained a neutral vocal tone. What did you learn? Elena set down her water glass. That you are either a highly successful businessman or a highly successful criminal, contingent upon the author of the article. Heels. That you lost your son 3 years ago. That individuals are either terrified of you or hold you in awe. Sometimes both. She paused. And that none of those descriptors match the individual I have been observing every Thursday night. Heels. Perhaps your observation period has been insufficient. Perhaps. Heels. But I know you provide Jeppy's gratuity personally each week, because you are aware Marco appropriates a percentage. I know you ensure my safe transit home when my shift concludes late, feels, despite your belief that I fail to notice your vehicle following mine. I know you read poetry and dislike dessert and exhibit a specific facial micro-expression when you are suppressing a smile. She leaned forward. So yes, my data may be incomplete, feels. Ronan's throat constricted. The information available online, it is irrelevant to me. It should be. Why? Because you are in proximity to a dangerous individual. She did not display fear. She should have, but did not. Feels. All individuals are dangerous under the correct circumstances. Your behavior toward me has been exclusively kind. Feels. That is not an indicator of my moral standing, Elena. I am not seeking a good man. Her green eyes held his. I am seeking an honest one. Can you be honest with me? It was a test. Ron identified it as such. Feels. The juncture where he must either commit to the dynamic between them or withdraw. Withdrawal was the safer, more logical course of action. Feels. A prophylactic measure to protect them both from the certain complications of integrating his world with anything genuine. But he had spent 3 years being safe, being logical, being psychologically inert. I can attempt to, he said. Feels. The admission appeared to satisfy her. Elena smiled and picked up her menu. Then for my purposes, that is sufficient. They ordered food neither would later recall. They spoke of everything and nothing. Her upbringing in California, Feels, his initial years in Polmo, books they had processed, locations they wished to observe. Feels. The interaction demonstrated easy rapport, marked by nonverbal cues suggesting significant emotional transference. Between courses, the subject Ronan ceased consumption, a notable behavioral shift. The female Elena initiated physical contact, Feels, an intertwining of fingers indicative of established intimacy. Her query, "Can I tell you something?" followed by his permissive anything, signaled a deepening of their psychological contract. Feels. Her self-analysis, that she sought a reason to stop running, points to a history of instability, now seeking an attachment figure. Roan's examination of her palm was symbolic, an attempt to find quantifiable data in an emotional exchange. Feels. Did you find it, he asked. I think so. Feels. Her vocal tone lowered, a classic sign of intimate disclosure. Her reciprocal query, did you, was not informational. It was a test for emotional validation. The subject, Ronan, Feels, has a history of responding to interrogation meant to dominate or extract information. This was different. This was Elena asking if she mattered. If months of structured meetings, social smiles, Feels, and careful proxemics had aggregated into something tangible. Yes, Ronan replied, and the affirmation appeared to be a rare alignment of his internal state and external expression. I did, her subsequent smile, a full, Feels, unguarded display, was the key stimulus that triggered his own realization of his compromised psychological state. And Ronan understood with perfect clarity that he was in trouble, the kind of vulnerability that cannot be neutralized by force. Feels. The kind that meant everything. Feels. The drive back to Elena's apartment was intentionally prolonged. Ronan engaged in diversionary tactics, taking side streets, slowing at intersections, to extend the duration of contact, a common behavior in subjects experiencing separation anxiety. Feels. When he finally stopped, Elena did not immediately exit the vehicle. I had a really good time tonight, she said. So did I. Even though I made you talk about feelings, especially because of that, she laughed. You're full of surprises. Feels. Ronan Vale. He experienced a powerful impulse to kiss her. It had been latent since she initiated contact at dinner, perhaps longer. But a clear conflict held him back. Feels. The awareness that crossing that line would irrevocably breach the emotional fortifications he had maintained for years. Feels. Elena appeared to sense his paralysis. She leaned across the console and administered a quick, non-threatening kiss to his cheek. Good night, Ronan. Then she was gone, halfway to her door before he could formulate a response. She turned, waved, Feels, and disappeared. Ronan remained in the unlit vehicle for a significant period, one hand on the spot where her lips had been, Feels, experiencing an emotional regression to adolescence instead of the expected response of a 50-year-old man conditioned by extreme violence. His phone buzzed. The name Luca appeared. What? Ronan answered. We have a situation, Feels. The shipment from Marseille, customs flagged it. They're asking questions. Reality crashed back. The world he had successfully repressed for the past 3 hours reasserted itself with brutal efficiency. I'll be there in 20 minutes, Feels, Ronan said and terminated the call. Feels. He took one final look at Elena's lit window, then proceeded toward the warehouse district where his primary reality waited. The subsequent weeks became an exercise in managing extreme cognitive dissonance. Feels. Ronan's days were filled with the logistics of his criminal enterprise, meetings with unreliable associates, shipments moved through ports via coercion and bribery, and problems solved with money, threats, or violence. Feels. He'd spent decades constructing an empire that ran on fear and efficiency, and it required constant maintenance. But his Thursdays belonged to Elena. They established a new ritual: dinner at Osteria del Luna, walks through Palermo's streets, feels, and late-night coffee near the water. Feels. Sometimes the sessions involved hours of verbal exchange. Other times they sat in comfortable silence. Elena made inquiries about his life that Ronan answered with curated honesty, never fabricating, but never revealing the full clinical picture. Feels. She disclosed her own history. A failed engagement in Los Angeles to a man who wanted a decorative spouse and could not comprehend her choices. She spoke of her parents, killed in a car crash when she was 23, feels, an event that left her untethered and searching for an unnamed sense of purpose. "I think that's why I kept moving," she said one night in January, huddled beside Ronan on a bench. "If I never stayed anywhere long enough to put down roots, feels, I never had to risk losing them, feels." And now she looked at him. "Now I'm tired of being safe." Ronan initiated a kiss then, finally breaching the emotional containment he had so carefully maintained. The sensory data he recalled was of coffee and possibility. Feels. When she made a small sound of surprise that evolved into something deeper, he felt the last of his control begin to fail. They returned to his villa that night, a place he'd barely inhabited for 3 years. Feels. A space that had become more mausoleum than home. Elena moved through the rooms, touching objects, asking about the photographs on the mantel. "That's Matteo," Ronan said when she paused at a picture of a dark-haired boy with his father's eyes. Feels. Approximately 14 years old, smiling for the camera. Feels. "Your son?" It was not a question. She had found the data during her own research. The bare facts of his death reported in clinical news articles. "Yes," Elena turned to face him. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to." But it seemed he did. Feels. Perhaps he had needed to for 3 years, lacking a subject he deemed safe enough for the disclosure. "He was 15, Ronan said, the words emerging rough. "Caught in crossfire meant for me. Wrong place, wrong time. My fault." "Ronan, it was my fault." Feels. He repeated the self-blame with greater force. "He died because of the life I chose, because I thought I could keep him separate from the business, keep him safe. I was wrong." Feels. Elena closed the space between them and took his face in her hands, forcing eye contact. "It wasn't your fault. You didn't pull the trigger. I might as well have. No, someone else made that choice. Someone else took him from you." Feels. Her thumbs brushed his cheekbones. "And I am so sorry that happened, but you can't carry that blame forever. It'll destroy you. Maybe I deserve to be destroyed." "Well, I don't agree." She pulled him down until their foreheads touched. Feels. "And I'm not going anywhere, so you're stuck with me disagreeing." Something within Ronan's psychological armor fractured. He pulled Elena close and held her, as if she were the only thing preventing his complete psychic disintegration. And perhaps she was. Feels. When he finally kissed her again, the act was desperate, honest. An expression of everything he had repressed for so long. He'd forgotten the sensation. They reached his bedroom eventually. Ronan undressed her slowly, meticulously, Feels, as if she might vanish if he moved too quickly. Elena remained patient, seeming to understand this was more than physical intimacy. This was a total surrender of control. Feels. This was allowing someone to see his complete psychological state and hoping they would not retreat. She didn't retreat. Afterward, she slept curled against him, a hand over his heart. Ronan lay awake, monitoring her respiration. Feels. Feeling an unfamiliar state approximating happiness, and trying to suppress intrusive thoughts about all the ways this could end catastrophically. Feels. Morning arrived too soon. Lena stretched, smiled at him, and said, "I should probably get home. I have a shift at 4. Call in sick. Can't. Jep is testing a new menu, and he gets cranky when I'm not there to taste things." She kissed his jaw. Feels. "But I'm off tomorrow. We could do this again, the sleeping over part. And maybe the parts that came before the sleeping. I'd like that." She dressed while Ronan observed, putting on yesterday's clothes and arranging her hair. At the door, she paused. "Thank you," Feels, she said. "For what? For letting me in. I know that's not easy for you." Feels. She touched his face one last time. "I meant what I said last night. I'm not going anywhere." Then she was gone, leaving Ronan in the silent villa with the olfactory reminder of her on his pillows and an emotional state in his chest he refused to name. Heels. His phone rang. Luca again. We need to meet, his second-in-command said without preamble. There's been a development. Ronan closed his eyes. What kind of development? The kind we should discuss in person. 1 hour. The usual place. Heels. The usual place was a warehouse on the city's periphery that Ronan used for meetings requiring absolute security. When he arrived, Luca was there with 3 other men Ronan trusted to the limited extent he trusted anyone in his profession. Heels. Which was to say, not very much. What's this about? Ronan asked. Luca produced his phone and displayed a series of photographs. Ronan. Elena leaving the restaurant, walking through the city, outside his villa. The images were grainy. Heels. But the subjects were clearly identifiable. Who took these? Ronan's voice had become cold. We don't know yet. They were delivered to Marco this morning with a note. Luca handed him a piece of paper. The message was concise. Heels. The kingpin has found something precious. How unfortunate. Ronan crushed the paper in his fist. Find out who sent this. I want a name by tonight. Already working on it, Luca said. But Ronan, Heels, you need to consider the possibility that this is, I know what this is, a threat, a warning. Heels. An external party had identified the subject's attachment to Elena, signaling it as a point of leverage. Standard protocol would dictate immediate disengagement. Heels. The logical course of action was to sever ties with Elena before the threat escalated from observation to direct intervention. To push her away, cultivate her animosity, and thereby ensure her safety through induced alienation. Heels. Ronan's entire existence was predicated on such logical, strategic decisions. Yet, the thought of excising Elena triggered a visceral, constrictive response in his chest. Increase security around the restaurant, he ordered instead. Heels. I want constant surveillance on Elena. She is not to be left unobserved. Heels. To achieve this without the subject's awareness presents a tactical problem. The directive is clear. She is not to notice. In this exchange, we see Luca Ronan establish a clear line of command with his second. The statement, Heels, if anything happens to her, I will burn this city to the ground, is not hyperbole but a clinical declaration of intent, a symptom of his megalomaniacal possessiveness. Luca's slow nod signals his comprehension of the stakes. The following Thursday, Heels, Ronan's arrival at Osteria del Luna is met with an altered security landscape. He notes the new personnel. His assessment, good, almost invisible. This confirms his paranoia is rooted in a realistic threat assessment. Marco, a subordinate, Heels, has complied. Elena presents with her typical affect, but Ronan detects nonverbal cues of inquiry in her gaze. She perceives a shift in the baseline. Her question, you okay? While delivering his wine is a direct probe into his psychological state. Heels. He appears tense, a standard stress response. The subject offers an opportunity for verbal processing. Want to talk about it? He declines. She studies him, assessing his emotional state before acquiescing. Okay, but if you change your mind, Heels. I'm here. This proximity is the core of his conflict. She is present in his life, his cognitive space, and consequently in the target zone of his adversaries. Heels. We observe a profound inability to reconcile his possessive attachment with the logical need for self-preservation, which would dictate her removal. The evening's meal is noted as excessive, a minor detail. Heels. Elena's action of joining him, a pattern established over months, is significant. Her statement, I've been thinking, is met with his dismissive response, dangerous, an attempt to control the conversation. Her physical retort, a light kick, Heels, is a test of boundaries. She verbalizes a desire for permanence, a real apartment, abandoning her transient living situation. Heels. She proposes university classes, the establishment of roots. This declaration triggers a complex reaction in Ronan's psyche. The subject has been in this location for almost 6 months, a new record for stability in his adult life. Heels. He attributes his contentment to the city, his work, and, after a hesitation marked by a physiological response, rising color in her cheeks, the company. Ronan gives his approval. You should do it. His rationale is telling. Heels. I think you should do whatever makes you happy. She then initiates physical contact, a bonding gesture, linking her fingers with his. You make me happy, she states. An explicit emotional dependency. Heels. She acknowledges the accelerated timeline and his mysterious business thing, a rationalization of the clear and present danger she is choosing to ignore. It is a textbook presentation of cognitive dissonance. Heels. Ronan, for the first time in a long time, I'm actually happy. This confession presents him with a critical juncture. The impulse to disclose the full reality of his identity, the inherent risk she is accepting, surfaces. The words, however, feels, are suppressed, caught between fear and a narcissistic hope that he can control all variables. He defaults to mirroring her emotion. I'm happy too. Her resultant smile is registered as a powerful positive reinforcement. Feels. The subsequent 3 weeks represent a period of deceptive normalcy. Ronan entertains the grandiose delusion that he can simultaneously manage his criminal empire and a domestic relationship. Feels. Compartmentalizing two fundamentally incompatible realities. Elena's assimilation into his life accelerates. She secures a new apartment and fills his villa with signs of life. Feels. His security apparatus yields no new intelligence, no leads on the source of the photographs. The threat assessment is downgraded. Luca posits it was a bluff, an attempt at psychological intimidation by a minor rival. Feels. Ronan's desire to accept this hypothesis reveals a flaw in his judgment. The call arrives on a Tuesday, a day he superstitiously associates with negative outcomes. The voice is electronically distorted. A professional. We have her. Feels. The words are precise. The American girl, your weakness. This externally validates his internal fear. Every muscle in Ronan's body exhibits an acute stress response. Total somatic tension. The threat is conditional. If you've hurt her, Feels, is cut off by the calm reply, not yet. Feels. The outcome, he is told, is entirely contingent upon his actions. A pause for effect. You have something we want. The demand is specified. The shipment from Marseille, previously flagged by customs, which he successfully moved. We want it, Feels. Ronan's response is immediate. Not possible. The kidnapper then frames the situation in cold transactional terms. Then the girl dies. Simple economics, Senor Val. One life for several million in product. The choice is presented as easy. Feels. The line is disconnected. Ronan's to contact Elena's phone. It goes directly to voicemail. He calls the restaurant. Marco answers. Ronan dispenses with social niceties. Is Elena there? The report is negative. Feels. She left an hour prior, ostensibly on an errand for him. What's wrong? Ronan is already in motion, securing keys, a weapon, and his phone. Feels. His order, lock down the restaurant. Nobody in or out until I say otherwise. Control of the environment is paramount. His next call is to Luca. Elena's been taken. He delegates the intelligence gathering. I want every resource we have on this. Feels. Find her. The precipitating cause is explained. The Marseille shipment is being used as leverage. Ronan is now mobile, driving toward Elena's apartment. A location he knows is empty but must verify. A compulsive action. His demands escalate. Feels. I need locations of every warehouse, every property, and I need it 5 minutes ago. When Luca raises the issue of the shipment, Ronan's priorities are made clear. I don't care about the shipment. Find her. Feels. This is not an emotional outburst, but a reevaluation of its importance. The potential damage to his ego and reputation from this breach outweighs the cargo's monetary value. Feels. Her apartment is empty. The door is unlocked. Her purse on the counter, staging designed to suggest a brief, casual departure. Reports from local vendors and shops are negative. She has vanished. His phone rings. The same distorted voice. Feels. The terms are now absolute. Midnight. The old cannery on Via Messina. Come alone with the shipment location or come to collect a body. Your choice. Ronan stops the car. Feels. Forcing himself to override the acute stress response with higher-order strategic thinking. He clinically assesses his opponent's methodology. This was not an impulsive act. The timing, Feels. The victim's isolation. It points to careful surveillance and planning, likely initiated by the delivery of the photographs. Feels. He arrives at the correct conclusion. This is the outcome of his own flawed risk assessment. He knew the dangers yet proceeded, driven by the narcissistic belief that his control was absolute. He was incorrect. Luca reports back with intelligence. Feels. 3 possible locations, all connected via shell companies to an individual named Santoro. Ronan's assessment of Santoro, a mid-level operator, ambitious and stupid, a dangerous combination. He cross-references the location. Feels. Which party is on Via Messina, the abandoned fish cannery? He has his location. That's where they'll be. Ronan is already reorienting his vehicle. I need a team ready to move. Full tactical. We hit them hard and fast. Feels. Luca interjects with a logical caution. A violent entry will likely result in the hostage's death. Feels. Ronan's rebuttal is cold and fatalistic. If I don't, they'll kill her anyway. He analyzes Santoro's psychology, concluding he is incapable of a protracted negotiation. The objectives are twofold. Acquire the shipment and eliminate Ronan. Feels. Elena is merely the instrument for this purpose. His rage transmutes into a focused operational coldness. This is his baseline state, a familiar psychological territory where problems are resolved through precise application of violence. Feels. He acknowledges the persona he adopted for Elena, a softer, more normative version of himself. Now that construct is irrelevant. The perpetrators are about to be confronted with his primary, authentic self, and he anticipates their regret. Feels. Midnight arrives, accompanied by sea fog. Feels. The cannery is a silhouette of urban decay. Ronan approaches from the south, leading a team of 9, including Luca, all armed and operating under his direct command. His briefing is concise. Remember, we get Elena out first. Feels. Everything else is secondary. She is the primary objective. The team advances with professional silence, a practiced efficiency. Ronan identifies Santoro's security posture. 2 at the entrance, 3 on patrol. His analysis: sloppy, overconfident, Feels. Fatal mistakes. The exterior guards are neutralized without a sound, a testament to his team's superior capability. Feels. Inside, voices echo in the large space. Ronan moves toward the sound, weapon ready, all sensory inputs heightened. He acquires a visual. Elena is restrained in a chair at the room's center. Duct tape obscures her mouth. Feels. There is evidence of a head injury, matted blood in her hair. She is alive, she is conscious. Her eyes meet his and her pupils dilate in recognition. Santoro is positioned beside her, a firearm pressed to her temple. He is flanked by 4 armed men. Feels. Punctual, Santoro calls out, a sarcastic jab at Ronan's professionalism. Let her go, Ronan responds, his voice devoid of affect. This is between us. Santoro refutes this. Is it because from where I'm standing, she seems pretty involved? Feels. He seizes Elena's hair, forcing her head back. Feels. She emits a muffled sound of pain, a stimulus that triggers a visible reddening in Ronan's field of vision, a physiological sign of extreme rage. Did you bring what I asked for? Santoro asks. First, let me see that she's unharmed. Feels. A demand for proof of condition. You can see her right here. I want to hear her voice. Proof of life, Santoro considers, then rips the tape from her mouth. She gasps. Ronan, she says, her voice remarkably stable. Don't give them anything. Feels. This is a fascinating display of traumatic bonding, aligning herself with her captor's perceived strength. Santoro strikes her with the back of his hand. The sound of the impact is sharp. Ronan lurches forward. Feels. A reflexive action arrested only by Luke's physical intervention. But Santoro has observed the reaction. His smile becomes cruel. Oh, this is better than I thought. You actually care about her. Feels. He traces the gun barrel along Elena's cheek. Tell me, Vale, is she worth millions in product? Is she worth your reputation? He is probing for the extent of Ronan's narcissistic injury. Name your price, Ronan says. Feels. Attempting to revert to a transactional framework he can control. Money, territory, the shipment, whatever you want. Just let her go. Santoro dismisses the offer. See, that's the problem. I don't think you understand the position you're in. Feels. He increases the pressure of the gun. I don't just want the shipment, I want everything. The demand is for total annihilation. His empire, his network, his entire operational existence. And you're going to give it to me, because if you don't, Feels, I'm going to put a bullet in her head and make you watch. Elena's gaze remains locked on Ronan, the focal point of the psychological warfare. Feels. Even in a state of terror, even while bleeding, the subject Elena exhibited signs of what could be classified as nascent trauma bonding, a misplaced trust. The antagonist, Santoro, employed a classic intimidation tactic, a countdown, 10 seconds. Feels. 9, 8. The primary subject, Ronan, raised his firearm. The environment was then plunged into sensory chaos, a sudden loss of light followed by auditory assault from multiple points. Ronan navigated the space, Feels, relying on spatial memory to move toward Elena, a clear demonstration of operational focus under duress. Santoro vocalized frustration. The subject, Elena, initiated a desperate act of self-preservation. Ronan then physically intervened, Feels, severing her restraints and pulling her into a protective hold. His vocalizations, I've got you, served as a powerful imprinting statement during a moment of peak vulnerability. An external warning. He pivoted and discharged his weapon twice. Feels. Santoro collapsed, his weapon falling inert. The engagement lasted approximately 30 more seconds before cessation of hostilities. The subordinate Luca emerged from the darkness with a tactical report, clear, all threats neutralized. Feels. Ronan then lifted Elena, carrying her from the scene. The subject was exhibiting clear symptoms of acute stress reaction, uncontrollable tremors, yet she displayed bonding behavior. encircling his neck with her arms. Her whisper, "You came for me," feels, confirms the solidification of the protector-victim dynamic. His response was absolute, "Of course I came for you." She questioned the choice he was forced to make. "There was no choice," Ronan stated, feels. A classic reframing that positions the subject as an absolute priority, negating all other variables. He transported her directly to a private medical professional, further isolating her within his controlled network, feels. The physician's assessment confirmed the subject was physically viable, sustaining only a concussion and contusions. The psychological impact, however, remained unassessed. Ronan maintained constant physical proximity throughout the examination, feels, a tactile reinforcement of his protective role. His thoughts were preoccupied with alternative, more negative outcomes, a typical response after a near loss of a highly valued individual. Upon returning to his residence at dawn, feels, the subject succumbed to exhaustion induced by trauma. Ronan observed her sleeping, a period of quiet surveillance. A communication from Luca confirmed the complete dismantling of Santoro's organization. All threats neutralized, secure, feels. Ronan's directive was clear: institute constant, round-the-clock surveillance on Elena, feels. I want to be informed of any anomalous observation. He then assumed a position in the bed next to her. For the first time since a previous significant trauma, the death of his son, the subject Ronan permitted himself an emotional release, feels. Elena awoke to unfamiliar stimuli, her physiological state immediately oriented by Ronan's steady respiration. A brief moment of amnesia was followed by a flood of traumatic memory, triggered by somatic pain signals from her ribs, feels. She turned her focus to Ronan. He was still in a state of sleep, yet she observed clear signs of latent tension in his jaw and mouth, indicative of persistent psychological distress and hypervigilance even while unconscious. Feels. He had employed lethal force on her behalf. The subject had witnessed the aftermath, the bodies as he carried her out. She had observed the man she thought she understood transform into a colder, feels, more lethally efficient entity than she had previously allowed herself to conceptualize, and it was all in response to the threat against her. This is a critical point in cognitive reframing. Elena initiated physical contact, feels, a slow tracing of his jawline. Ronan's response was instantaneous, a waking state primed for violence. "Hey," she vocalized softly. "How do you feel?" His hand moved to her face, his thumb gently assessing the bruised tissue on her cheekbone. "Feels like I was pistol whipped and abducted by a textbook psychopath." Feels. She attempted a smile. "So you know the outcome could have been worse." "Elena, don't." She interrupted his expected apology with physical contact, pressing her fingers to his lips. Feels. She preemptively shut down his anticipated narrative of guilt and his directive that she should engage in self-preservation by fleeing. Ronan captured her hand, holding it to his chest. "You should run far away from me." "Too late." Feels. "My running ability is poor. I disclosed that information months ago." She moved closer, ignoring the pain signals from her ribs. "What transpired last night was not your responsibility." Feels. "It was the responsibility of an individual who assessed kidnapping as a viable business tactic. It occurred as a consequence of me, because you were in my proximity." "Correct. And I remain in this proximity." Feels. "I am still choosing this proximity." Elena established direct eye contact. "I will not deny the terrifying nature of last night's events." Feels. "I will not pretend that discovering my partner is some form of criminal syndicate leader doesn't require a period of psychological adjustment. But I am also not fleeing." Feels. "You can either accept this fact, or you can expend the foreseeable future attempting to distance me. I assure you, my stubbornness will outlast your patience." A micro-expression flickered across Ronan's face. Perhaps relief, perhaps belief. Feels. "You are not fully aware of what you are saying. I am perfectly aware of what I'm saying. I have spent the last 6 months developing a strong emotional attachment to you. The authentic you, not a sanitized construct. And yes," Feels, "perhaps I lacked the specific details of your enterprise, but I am not a fool, Ronan." Feels. "I knew you were not an importer of olive oil, or whatever cover story you were utilizing. So you were aware?" "I had suspicions. There is a distinction." She touched his face again. "I suspected your involvement in complex, likely illicit activities." Feels. "I also knew you demonstrated kindness toward me, protectiveness of your subordinates, and that you were carrying a grief that was methodically destroying you. Those observations were weighted more heavily. They should not have been." "Well, they were." Feels. "They are." Elena took an unsteady breath. "May I ask you a question?" "Anything." "The man who abducted me, Santoro, is he deceased? Ronan showed no physiological reaction. Yes. Did you terminate him? Yes. She nodded, processing the new information. Heals. In cinematic narratives, this is the juncture where the normative female character would recoil in horror. Heals. But Elena had assessed Santoro's psychological state the previous night, had observed the casual cruelty and the absolute readiness to end her life. She had also observed Ronan's reaction to Santoro's violence against her, a potent mixture of rage, fear, feels, and desperate attachment. Ronan's eyebrows arched. Okay, I will not feign enthusiasm for violence. My temperament is not oriented that way, feels. But I am also not going to lie here and express a wish that you had allowed him to live, only for him to make another attempt. She met his gaze. I am glad you retrieved me. I am glad to be alive, feels. And if this acceptance classifies me as a morally deficient person, then I suppose I will learn to integrate that into my identity. He pulled her closer then, mindful of her injuries, burying his face in her hair. You are not a bad person, feels. You are the best person I have ever encountered. That sets a rather low standard if my competition includes kidnappers and crime lords. Elena, sorry. Inappropriate humor is my primary coping mechanism for trauma. She pressed her face to his shoulder, feels. Can we just maintain this physical contact for a while? I do not wish to engage in cognitive processing of any other events yet. So they remained. They stayed in bed as the sun ascended, while the day progressed without their participation, feels. While Ronan's phone signaled repeatedly with communications he chose to ignore, Elena experienced fragmented, restless sleep, interrupted by intrusive traumatic memories that caused her to jolt awake. Each time Ronan was present, feels, a solid and real anchor, pulling her back from the precipice of panic. Feels. Around noon, a knock came at the bedroom door. Luca's voice followed. Ronan, we must confer. The matter is urgent. Ronan vocalized a soft curse. 5 minutes. He began to detach, but Elena grasped his hand. It's acceptable. Feels. Go manage the crisis that requires management. I am not going anywhere. I will return momentarily, I know. She watched him depart, then carefully maneuvered herself into an upright position. Feels. Her reflection in the mirror across the room was a clinical picture of recent trauma. Bruised, battered, with dried blood in her hairline from the previous night, she appeared as someone who had narrowly survived a terrible ordeal. Feels. She appeared as someone who needed to make a decision. Elena had spent her adult life avoiding situations perceived as too difficult, too complicated, too real. She had operated under the belief that mobility equated to safety, feels, that an absence of roots prevented the pain of their loss. But in the Canary, faced with imminent death and the prospect of never seeing Ronan again, Elena had a critical realization. Absolute safety is a cognitive distortion, feels. One could flee indefinitely and still encounter mortal danger. The only authentic choice was whether one's life was worth its inherent risks. And for her, Ronan was. She located a robe in his closet and made her way downstairs. Feels. The sounds of Ronan and Luca's voices speaking in rapid Italian emanated from his study. Feels. Elena could parse maybe 1 word in 5, but the tone was unambiguous, tense and urgent. She knocked on the door frame, and both men ceased speaking. Apologies, she said. I did not mean to interrupt. I was merely seeking coffee. Feels. The kitchen is through there, Ronan indicated. I will prepare something for you. You are occupied with something. I can manage it, Elena. Ronan, I have been preparing my own coffee for more than a decade, feels. I believe I can operate your sophisticated Italian espresso machine, she managed to smile. Besides, you two clearly have business. I will remain out of the way. She exited before he could object, located the kitchen, feels, and after 10 minutes of failing to decipher the espresso machine, defaulted to preparing drip coffee in a pot found in a cabinet. The familiar ritual was stabilizing, feels. Normal tasks on a morning that was anything but. Luca appeared in the doorway as she poured a second cup. In proximity, he was younger than she had assessed, perhaps in his mid-30s, with keen eyes and a posture indicative of military conditioning. Feels. Signorina Hart, he said, I wish to apologize for what occurred. We should have maintained closer surveillance. We should have anticipated Santoro's move. His English was fluent, with a minimal accent. The event was unacceptable. Feels. Elena held her coffee mug with both hands. You could not have known. It is our function to know. To protect the individual's Ronan values. Luca paused. He is different with you, improved. We all observe it. Different. Feels. How? By being present, by being engaged. Before you, his life was a series of rote actions. Now he's re-experiencing it. Luca's clinical demeanor softened almost imperceptibly. I knew his son. Matteo was a good kid. After his death, feels we assumed we'd lost Ronan as well. Not in a physical sense, but in every metric that defines a person. Then you appeared, creating a minor disruption at his table, and it acted as a catalyst. Mama will see I had no role in this. You were the entire role, feels. You reintroduced him to the sensation of being human. Luca retrieved his phone and keyed in a command. I am assigning you a protective detail, a two-person team on rotating shifts. They will remain covert, but they will be present. Feels. Is that truly required after last night's events? Yes, it is absolutely required. Feels. He held her gaze. Santoro is not the sole entity who will perceive you as leverage. The intelligence is already circulating. Ronan Vale has a vulnerability. This classification makes you a target. Feels. The clinical manner of his delivery caused a somatic reaction in Elena's stomach. So, what is my protocol? Am I to live in isolation? Remain confined to this residence. Live your life. Feels. But do so with the cognitive awareness that you are under constant observation. Luca's phone vibrated. He checked the display, then returned his focus to Elena. I must depart. But, Senorina Hart, Elena, should you require anything at all, feels, you are to contact me. Ronan's trust in you extends to the rest of us. He departed, leaving her with her coffee and the immense psychological weight of her new circumstances. This was not merely a complicated romance. Feels. It was an entry into a subculture with incomprehensible rules, unpredictable threats, and potentially fatal outcomes. Feels. Elena mentally cataloged her apartment, her career, the simple existence she had been constructing. She contemplated contacting Marco to resign, packing her effects, and securing passage to a location far from Sicily. Feels. Far from men with firearms and extractions from derelict warehouses. Then, she recalled Ron's expression upon locating her the previous night. The absolute conviction in his voice as he stated, there was only ever you, Feels. She placed her coffee mug on the table and went to find him. Ronan remained in his study, now in isolation, staring at a laptop screen with an intensity that suggested a complete lack of visual processing. He looked up as Elena entered. Feels. You should be resting, he stated. I should be many things. More intelligent, likely more attuned to self-preservation. Feels. She moved to his desk, settling on its edge. But I am not, which brings us to this point. Elena, I need you to comprehend, she interrupted him. Not the operational details. I don't require knowledge of your business, Feels. But I require a full understanding of what association with you entails. Ronan leaned back. It entails danger, a state of constant hypervigilance. It means hostile parties will seek to harm you as a means of affecting me, Feels. Acknowledged. What else? It means I cannot offer you a normal existence. I cannot provide the things most women desire. Quiet dinners without a security presence. Vacations that don't involve mapping exit strategies. Feels. A relationship that is not accompanied by a body count. Feels. I've never acclimated well to normal anyway. Elena reached out, taking his hand. What can you guarantee? He paused for a considerable time. I can guarantee that I will utilize every resource at my disposal to ensure your safety. Feels. That I will never misrepresent who I am or the nature of my activities. That should you decide one day that this is untenable, I will facilitate your departure without complication. And if I choose not to depart, Feels, then I can promise to love you with a singular focus. To attempt to be worthy of your decision to remain. His thumb traced patterns on her palm. But Elena, you must process this with absolute clarity. What occurred last night? That is my world, Feels, is composed of violence, danger, and impossible decisions. Feels. It will not alter simply because I wish it to. I'm not asking for it to alter. I am asking if there is a place for me within that world. There is a place. There has always been a place. Ronan drew her onto his lap, mindful of her contusions. Feels. But I need you to be certain. Elena looked at the man who had become her central attachment figure over 6 months, who had exposed his grief, his capacity for violence, and his unexpected tenderness. Feels. A man who had killed for her and then wept as she slept. I'm certain, she said. He kissed her then, a soft and deliberate act, and Elena felt a new equilibrium establish itself in her chest. Not peace, but certainty. The deep Feels. Somatic knowledge that whatever followed, down whatever perilous path, she was proceeding with full, informed consent. When they finally separated, Ronan rested his forehead against hers. Feels. I am not deserving of you. Objectively, probably not, but you are nonetheless stuck with me. Fortunate for me. Yes, Elena concurred, fortunate for you. The subsequent days established a new baseline. Elena resumed her work schedule. Feels. Overriding Ronan's objections, determined to prevent fear from dictating her actions. Her security detail consisted of a female operative, Sophia, and a male operative, Marco, a former soldier with a long history of service to Ronin. They were professional and unobtrusive. After an initial period of adjustment, Elena could almost dismiss their presence. Almost. Jeppy welcomed her back with tears and a torrent of Italian she was certain contained elaborate curses aimed at the memory of Santoro. The kitchen staff treated her with extreme caution for approximately 1 hour, until her curt reply to an inquiry about her fitness for duty reminded them she was not incapacitated. Marco, the proprietor, took her aside during her first shift. Senorina Elena, if you require time off, I don't. I require work. I require normalcy. She fastened her apron. Besides, if I remain idle and contemplative, I will induce a state of psychosis. He nodded, his weathered face showing comprehension. Then you will work. But if my assessment changes, I will inform you. I accept. Ronan appeared at the restaurant that Thursday per his routine. This time, however, Elena sat opposite him before he could order, ignoring her service obligations. Hello, she said. Hello to you. He observed her with an expression of disbelief, as if still verifying her existence. How was your day? Long. My feet ache. Jeppy tested a new sauce that I am 90% certain contained a criminally high concentration of garlic. She reached for his hand across the table. But it was good, normal. I needed the normalcy. I'm glad. They remained like that for a moment. Hands clasped, while the restaurant functioned around them. Then Elena said, Tell me about Matteo. Ronan's composure fractured. Elena, I want to know. Not from morbid curiosity, but because he was significant to you, which makes him significant to me. She squeezed his hand. You don't have to if you aren't prepared, but I am here if you are. He remained silent for so long she presumed he would refuse. Then he began to speak. He had an affinity for music, aspired to be a composer. He would spend hours at the piano, to his mother's irritation. A faint smile briefly crossed Ronan's face. He possessed my temper, but her laugh. He was terrible at football, but insisted on playing. A voracious reader. He carried books everywhere, even to the dinner table. He sounds wonderful. He was the embodiment of everything good in my life. Ronan's voice became coarse. His mother died when he was 8, cancer. After that, it was just the two of us. I attempted to insulate him from my business, but he was intelligent. He understood my activities. It was a constant source of conflict. What did he want you to do? Resign. Disengage completely. Use our capital to establish a legitimate enterprise. Ronan looked down at their joined hands. He had formulated an entire plan. We would relocate to the coast, open a restaurant, live quiet lives. He said I could learn to cook. He would curate the music for the dining room. It was a pleasant fantasy. Why did you not execute it? Because I was arrogant. I believed I could manage both worlds, the empire and a normal life. I thought my intelligence, caution, and power were sufficient to maintain their separation. His jaw muscles tensed. I was incorrect. Elena felt a profound ache for him, for the man he was before loss excised all his softer components. How did it occur? A car bomb. It was intended for me, but a meeting ran late. I sent my driver to collect Matteo from school. They were 2 blocks from our residence when it detonated. Ronan's voice had become flat, devoid of affect. The tone of a subject who has recited a traumatic narrative so frequently that it should be neutralized. Except it wasn't. The pain was evident in every line on his face. He died instantly, the driver as well. I was the one required to identify the remains. Ronan, I eliminated everyone involved. It took me 6 months, but I located every individual who had any role in the attack. I ensured they understood precisely what they had taken from me before I terminated them. He met her eyes. Does that frighten you? It should have. Elena knew, objectively it should have, yet all she experienced was grief for a boy she never knew and the father who had lost him. No, she said quietly, it should. Perhaps, but it doesn't. She rose, moved to his side of the table, and encircled him with her arms from behind. I am sorry you lost him. My assessment of your experience is one of profound empathy. Regrettably, the cruelty of the external world often leads individuals to perceive retribution as their sole recourse. Ronan's hand then covered hers, a physical gesture of validation over his chest. I maintained a presence here each Thursday, a ritualistic adherence to the day we would cook together. The belief was that by sustaining the ritual, his absence would feel less absolute. Instead, the effect was magnified, the void made more acute. Then came the wine incident, first my spill, then yours. He shifted to observe her directly, and for the first time in 3 years I registered a sensation other than grief. Heels. Elena responded with a kiss to his head. He would approve of this, you know, that you are permitting yourself to re-engage with life. You never knew him. Heels. I am familiar with the experience of losing loved ones. My parents died 6 years ago. An automotive accident. A case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, extinguished in a moment. She moved to face him, Heels, and I am certain they would want me to continue living, to find joy where I can, to prevent their deaths from defining the remainder of my life. I believe Matteo would desire the same for you. Ronan then pulled her onto his lap. Heels. What is the source of your wisdom? Extensive therapy and excessive solitary introspection. She settled into his hold. We are a matched set, are we not? A pair of damaged individuals attempting to reconstruct a sense of wholeness. Heels. Perhaps that is sufficient. Perhaps it is more than sufficient. Heels. They remained in that position until the demands of other patrons required attention, until a call from Jeppy in the kitchen, until the intrusion of reality necessitated Elena's return to her duties. Yet, Heels, a fundamental shift in their dynamic had occurred. A final barrier had been dismantled. That evening, back at the villa, Ronan presented Elena with photographic evidence of Matteo's life. Infant portraits, school pictures, Heels. Candid images of a dark-haired boy maturing into an adolescent who bore a painful resemblance to his father. Elena absorbed anecdotes of piano recitals, failed culinary experiments, Heels, and disputes over topics ranging from politics to pasta-making methodology. She came to know Matteo through the filter of his father's memory, and she grieved for the future that had been taken from them both. Heels. Thank you, Ronan stated once they were in bed. Elena positioned herself against his side. For what? For listening, for not absconding, for making me think I'm worthy of a second chance at this. You are worthy of it, as am I. Heels. Elena pressed a kiss to his shoulder. We both have a right to be happy, even if the route to it is chaotic and complex and occasionally involves abduction. Please refrain from making jokes about the abduction. Too premature? Premature. Heels. She smiled against his skin. Understood, I will workshop superior material. Elena, yes, I love you. The declaration remained in the space between them. Uncomplicated, genuine, and terrifying. Elena angled her head to look at him. I love you too. Heels. And in that instant, within the dark confines of a villa bedroom overlooking the Mediterranean, two fractured individuals discovered a reason to begin the healing process. Heels. The subsequent weeks were not without difficulty. Elena experienced nightmares related to the cannery, waking up breathless and disoriented until Ronan's voice could reorient her to reality. She reacted to loud sounds, Heels, could not tolerate having her back to a doorway, and developed a likely unhealthy fixation on knowing Ronan's location at all times. Yet she also laughed, worked, and began to formulate future plans extending beyond the immediate week. Heels. She started her Italian lessons in earnest, determined to comprehend the rapid-fire discussions around her, and converted an empty room in the villa into a study for her online literature courses. Ronan, in turn, Heels, appeared committed to demonstrating he could be the type of man who merited her presence. He showed her areas of Palermo hidden from tourists and cautiously introduced her to his associates, always with Sofia and Marco present, Heels, in a genuine attempt to integrate her into his world. Heels. He surprised her with minor gifts that demonstrated his attentiveness to her preferences. They had conflicts, sometimes regarding her safety, his overprotective tendencies, and his habit of making unilateral decisions for her. Heels. Elena maintained her position, refusing to be handled like a fragile object and demanding to be viewed as a partner rather than a possession to be guarded. Slowly and with difficulty, Ronan learned to allow her access, Heels, to trust her capacity to handle the realities of his life, and to believe her affection was not contingent on him being someone else. 2 months post-kidnapping, Elena awoke to find Ronan already conscious, observing her with an unreadable expression. Heels. What? She asked, half asleep. Marry me, this fully roused her. What, marry me? He reiterated. I am aware of the speed. I know we should likely wait, follow protocol, but I have no desire to wait. Heels. I have wasted 3 years in a state of numbness, and I am finished wasting time. Elena pushed herself into a sitting position. Are you genuinely proposing to me at 6 in the morning before I've even had coffee? Is that a negative response? Heels. That is I require you to repeat the question when I am fully conscious and potentially when a ring is involved. She poked him in the chest. This is a significant event, Ronan. You are not permitted to perform it half-heartedly. Feels. A smile formed on his mouth. So that is not a negative. That is a propose correctly, and we shall see. He then kissed her deeply and completely, and Elena concluded she might not require coffee after all. 3 days later, Feels. Ronan escorted her to dinner at a restaurant situated on a cliff above the sea. Feels. They ate at a leisurely pace, discussing trivial matters when dessert arrived. An item Ronan had uncharacteristically ordered. A ring was placed atop the tiramisu. An improvement? He asked. Elena focused on the ring. It was simple, elegant. Feels. A diamond that captured the candlelight and reflected it in brilliant flashes. A significant improvement. Elena Hart, Ronan began, taking her hand. You entered my life unexpectedly and refused to depart. Feels. You witnessed my most flawed aspects and remained regardless. You inspire me to be better, to act better, to live better. Will you marry me? She was crying. She was unaware of when the tears had started. Yes, Elena said through them. Yes, absolutely. Feels. He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. Feels. And Elena contemplated the sequence of choices that had brought her to this point. The failed engagement in Los Angeles, the choice to relocate to Palermo, the split-second decision when she'd burst through a kitchen door without looking. Every error, Feels, every deviation, every moment of doubt had led her to this man, this existence, this future she hadn't realized she desired. I love you, she said. I love you too. Ronan drew her close. Feels. And I promise to spend the remainder of my life demonstrating that you made the correct decision. I am already certain I did. And standing on a Sicilian cliff, engaged to a man who had killed for her, cried for her, Feels, and loved her with an intensity that should have been terrifying, but wasn't, Elena finally grasped the meaning of ceasing her flight. Feels. It meant remaining stationary long enough for happiness to find her. The engagement prompted changes Elena had not foreseen. The ring on her finger served as both a promise and a public statement. Within 24 hours, Feels, it seemed common knowledge throughout Palermo's criminal subculture that Ronan Vale was to be married. The feedback was varied. Some of Ronan's associates sent gifts, expensive, Feels. Impersonal items arriving with cards signed with names Elena did not recognize. Others became silent, a behavior Luca interpreted as either disapproval or cautious neutrality. And a select few, those Ronan trusted implicitly, Feels, visited the villa for a formal introduction. Feels. They want to confirm your existence, Ronan explained the morning of the first meeting, to see if this is real or merely some complex midlife crisis. Elena looked up from her coffee. And what is my role? To perform? Feels. To establish my worthiness for the great Ronan Vale. I want you to be yourself. That is all you have ever been required to be. An easy statement for you. You are not the American waitress marrying into Sicilian royalty. I am far from royalty. Feels. You comprehend my meaning. She put her mug down. These people will pass judgment on me, on us. And I am not equipped for this, Ronan. My command of the language is insufficient. I don't understand the political dynamics. Feels. I don't know the proper way to navigate the hierarchy that exists in your world. Feels. He moved around the table and tilted her chin up to meet his gaze. You survived an abduction by a man intent on my destruction. You looked him in the eye and did not shatter. Those are all the credentials you require. Feels. That is not equivalent to knowing which fork to use at a formal dinner. We are Sicilian. We use one fork. He kissed her forehead. Cease your worrying. They will love you. They did not love her. Not initially. The first meeting was with Dante Russo, Feels, who managed operations on the eastern side of the island and had known Ronan for more than 20 years. He arrived at the villa with 2 bodyguards and an expression that communicated his foregone conclusion. Elena was a mistake. Feels. So Dante began in heavily accented English after the initial formalities concluded. You are the woman who has ensnared our Ronan's heart. I spilled wine on him. The heart component manifested later. Elena maintained a light tone, Feels, but she felt the pressure of his evaluation. Dante remained unsmiling. Do you comprehend what you are marrying into? The lifestyle, the expectations, the inherent dangers, Feels. I received a fairly comprehensive preview 2 months ago when I was used as leverage. So yes, I comprehend. And you remain despite this. Why? The question was blunt, but Elena found the directness preferable. Because I love him, Feels. Because he provides me with happiness. Because the prospect of leaving and spending my life contemplating what might have been is a worse fate than any danger I might encounter. Feels. The senior figure, Dante, conducted a prolonged observation of the subject, then addressed Ronan, an assessment was made. She possesses fortitude, a positive evaluation. This quality was deemed essential. While the feedback was minimal, feels. Ronan registered satisfaction. Post-encounter, Elena displayed acute somatic stress, collapsing onto a sofa. The experience was reported as exhausting. Ronan offered validation, feels, rationalizing Dante's behavior as protectiveness derived from past negative observations. Ronan then presented evidence of Dante's approval. Subtle social cues, feels, like speaking English to avoid causing her linguistic distress, framing them as significant within their cultural context. The subsequent weeks involved continued exposure to these evaluative meetings. Feels. The subject's integration process yielded variable results. A female associate, Isabetta, who reportedly manages illicit gambling, demonstrated immediate affinity. Feels. Offering unsolicited counsel on navigating domestic life in parallel with criminal enterprise. A younger male, Franco, presented with suspicion regarding Elena's motivations until she exhibited assertiveness. Feels. A display which seemed to recalibrate his assessment and earn his deference. Throughout these interactions, Elena developed skills in deciphering subtext-heavy communication, feels, learning to interpret the subtle power dynamics and social codes of the group. The core lesson absorbed was the primacy of loyalty over conventional morality, where status is secured through perceived strength, not affability, feels. The process was described as exhausting, exhilarating, and intermittently terrifying. I feel like I'm in a crash course on a subject I never signed up for, she confided to Ronan, following a notably tense engagement with his lieutenants. Feels. A fitting analogy. Like someone handed me a textbook in a language I don't speak and said, "Figure it out," he responded with verbal reassurance. She recounted a social error involving an associate named Carmine, Feels, where an innocuous comment about a restaurant was perceived as an insult to his territory. Ronan grimaced, confirming Carmine's pathological sensitivity to geography. This highlights her core anxiety, navigating an intricate web of alliances, feels, historical grievances, and territorial taboos without a functional schema. Elena expressed overwhelming frustration, feels. I'm a literature major from California, she stated, contrasting her past experiences, trivial departmental politics. With her current high-stakes reality, Ronan employed a calming strategy, framing her steep learning curve as an acceptable process. Feels. She then verbalized a primary fear, becoming the inadvertent cause of conflict, of triggering internecine warfare through a social misstep. Ronan responded with physical comfort and verbal minimization. Feels. Shifting blame for any potential incident onto the hypothetical reactor's pathology, not her human error. That would be on them for being ridiculous, he stated, reinforcing his role as her ultimate protector. Feels. Elena accepted the physical reassurance, a key step in trauma bonding. She then inquired about her official status upon marriage. You're already part of this, he replied. The wedding just makes it formal. Feels. That's what I'm afraid of. This admission triggered an inquiry from him about her commitment. Her response was ambivalent. No, maybe. I don't know. She exhibited physical signs of distress. I love you, she affirmed. Feels. But I'm also scared that once we do this, there's no going back, that I'll be locked into this world forever. Herein lies the central conflict, the fear of irreversible enmeshment. He presented the illusion of choice, feels, a classic manipulation tactic in high-control relationships. You can leave anytime you want. I'll let you go. The subject rejected this premise, struggling to articulate her actual fear, feels, the loss of her former identity, Elena Hart, and its replacement with a new one defined by his world, Elena Vale, a crime boss's wife, feels. You don't have to let go of anything. You just add to it, Ronan countered, attempting to reframe the identity shift as an expansion rather than an erasure, feels. He reinforced her pre-existing personality traits, the ones that challenged his authority, as immutable. The ring doesn't change that, he promised. A false promise. The ring, a symbol of her new status, immediately altered her social environment, feels. Elena observed changes in the behavior of others, deference from service staff, a new social distance, conversations that shifted upon her arrival. She was no longer an individual, but an extension of Ronan Vale's power, feels, a weight she was still learning to process. Her professional environment also became unstable, feels. Her employer, Jep, began treating her with excessive caution, as if she were fragile. Colleagues vacillated between ingratiation and avoidance. Even Marco, a key associate of Ronan's, displayed uncertainty in their interactions, feels. Ronan suggested a solution that would increase her dependence, You could quit. You don't need to work anymore. The subject rejected this. I like working. I like feeling useful. Feels. When he tried to define her use value in relational terms. You're my fiancé. That's not enough for me, Ronan. I need to be my own person, not just an extension of you. His response was a denial of intent. Feels. I'm not asking you to be an extension of me. Feels. But that's what happens, isn't it? She countered, accurately identifying the typical role of wives in his subculture. Accessories. Pretty things to show off. Ronan's facial expression hardened. Feels. A common defensive reaction to having one's motives accurately assessed. Is that what you think I want? His question was a deflection. She admitted her uncertainty, but noted the dissonance between his words and the environment he cultivates. Feels. The subject's frustration, accumulated over weeks of navigating these contradictory signals, culminated in an emotional outburst. She correctly identified that even if his intent wasn't malicious, Feels. Her isolation was a direct consequence of her association with him. He demanded to know her desired outcome, stating his inability to control others' perceptions. I want you to see me as a partner, she pleaded, not as something fragile. Feels. I think I can handle carrying 2 plates, she stated, citing her survival of a previous kidnapping as evidence of her resilience. The confrontation reached its peak. A tense silence. Feels. This marked their first significant conflict since formalizing their engagement, focused on foundational issues of power and identity. Finally, Ronan conceded. You're right, he said. Feels. He then reframed his controlling behavior as a symptom of his own trauma. The thought of losing you terrifies me. The subject's emotional state shifted in response. I'm terrified too, she admitted, expressing fear of losing him, of failure, Feels, and of identity dissolution. Feels. The subject's anger subsided, replaced by a shared sense of vulnerability. But we can't build a life together if you're constantly trying to wrap me in bubble wrap. Ronan agreed in principle, but she pressed for specifics. Feels. You have Luca assigned security. You vetoed my idea to take night classes. You barely let me out of your sight. She correctly intuited that his surveillance extended to her workplace. He confirmed it. I do have someone watching. Feels. Sophia's always there. This admission validated her feelings of being controlled, causing another outburst. I can't live like this, she declared, equating his monitoring with a lack of relational freedom. He defaulted to his standard justification. Feels. It's not about control. It's about keeping you safe. Feels. It's about both, she retorted, demonstrating a clear understanding of the dynamic. She initiated physical contact, a de-escalation tactic, and attempted to negotiate. I'm not asking you to stop caring. Feels. I'm asking you to trust that I can make smart decisions. She then astutely connected his pathology to a past trauma, the death of his son. After Matteo died, I swore I'd never let anyone close enough to lose again, he confessed. Then you happened. Feels. He admitted his fear was a constant, powerful force. This revelation served to elicit her sympathy. I'm not Matteo, she replied, attempting to psychologically separate herself from his past loss. I'm not your son. Feels. And you can't protect me the way you wish you'd protected him, she continued. He acknowledged the cognitive truth of her statement, but maintained that the emotional reality, the fear, was impervious to logic. Feels. Then we figure out how to live with the fear without letting it control us, she proposed, squeezing his hands. She articulated the unsustainability of his methods, predicting she would either suffocate or explode. After a prolonged silence, Feels, he capitulated verbally, pulling her into an embrace. I'll try, he promised, framing his controlling behaviors as instinctual and difficult to overcome. Feels. I know, she said, accepting his framing and agreeing to a gradual process of change. We're both going to have to try. A resolution was reached through apologies and promises, typical of the reconciliation phase in a conflict cycle. Subsequently, Feels. Ronan made a tactical adjustment, instructing Luca to reduce the overtness of the security detail. It was a concession, but the surveillance itself remained non-negotiable. Feels. This demonstrated a minor behavioral shift designed to appease the subject without ceding significant control. Feels. In response, Elena demonstrated increased compliance, attempting to mitigate his anxiety by providing more information about her movements. She accepted the baseline level of security as a necessary condition of the relationship. Feels. This is a classic bargaining stage. Her psychological need for control was then sublimated into wedding planning. She fixated on logistical details, venues, caterers, floral arrangements, with an intensity Ronan found amusing. Feels. His suggestion to elope was dismissed outright. Absolutely not, she declared, citing a negative past experience and revealing a need to define her own marital ceremony, feels, thereby exerting control over the one area of her new life she felt she could manage, feels. The subject presented with two fabric samples, nearly indistinguishable. Ivory versus cream. To a layperson, the distinction is negligible. To her, it was a point of contention. Ivory possesses warm undertones, while cream presents as cooler, feels, a variable she claimed affected the entire aesthetic. He feigned indifference, a common tactic of passive control. Elena then initiated a minor physical confrontation, tossing a swatch. She demanded an opinion, feels. His response, "You'll be beautiful regardless," was a textbook deflection, validating her ego while sidestepping the trivial choice. Her subsequent smile indicated the maneuver's success. The chosen venue, a seaside villa outside Palermo, feels, was selected for its isolation and control. A guest list of 50, primarily Ronan's subordinates, and a few token friends of hers, including Marco, a surrogate paternal figure she had bonded with in the preceding year, feels, ensured a tightly managed environment, feels. The absence of extended family is a notable factor, as Elena's parents were deceased and Ronan had strategically severed his own familial ties. This mutual isolation fosters intense codependency. "It's going to be intimate," Elena relayed to Jep, feels, the caterer, framing the control as a preference for intimacy. "Good food, good company, no pretense." Jep's query about security was a recognition of the underlying reality. Elena's confirmation, "Lots of security," feels, but hopefully discreet, was naive. As Jep correctly observed, an event involving an individual of Ronan Vale's profile would never be discreet. The wedding rapidly evolved into a significant event within Palermo's criminal subculture, feels, an occasion demanding extensive security protocols. Luca managed the logistics with clinical precision, converting a personal celebration into an operation requiring background checks and magnetometers, feels. "This is insane," Elena commented 2 weeks prior, observing Luca's team conducting a sweep for surveillance devices. It was a moment of lucidity. "We're getting married, not hosting a summit," feels. Ronan's reply was a critical piece of psychological conditioning. In our world, they're basically the same thing. He was not asking her to join his world. He was stating an established fact. His gentle correction, "our world," feels, cemented her absorption into his identity. Elena's physical response, leaning against him, signified acceptance. Her verbal admission, "I do like it. Sometimes I don't want to, but I do," is a classic articulation of Stockholm Syndrome, feels. The subject acknowledges the cognitive dissonance but embraces the captor's reality. Her friendship with Isabetta represents an integration into the social structure of the criminal organization, with Sofia serving as a constant, discreet monitor, feels. "You're nervous," Isabetta stated, an observation, not a question. "Terrified," Elena admitted, verbalizing her deep-seated anxiety. "What if I'm making a huge mistake? What if I'm not cut out for this life?" Isabetta's response was not one of comfort, feels, but of normalization. She reframed Elena's trauma, surviving Santoro and an encounter with Dante Russo, as credentials for this new life. She presented a harsh worldview. "You are stronger than you think," feels. Elena's feeling of being one wrong move away from disaster is an accurate assessment of her new environment. Isabetta confirms this is the baseline state for women in their circle. "The key," she explained, "is strategic action," feels. She then offered a personal case study, recounting a youthful marriage based on the delusion that love was sufficient. It was not, feels. Her husband's violent death left her with debts and enemies. "Don't be sorry," she instructed, rejecting pity. "I took what he left and built something better." She now controls more territory than he ever did, feels, attributing her success to an absence of the weaknesses that killed him. She then analyzed Elena's situation, identifying a key asset, a partner who actually respects you. Ronan's willingness to listen is framed as a rare strategic advantage, feels. "Don't waste it." Her concluding advice about comfortable footwear appears trivial, but it's a lesson in pragmatism. Endurance and presentation are paramount in their world, and physical discomfort is an exploitable weakness, feels. "It is better than most wedding advice you will receive. Trust me," feels. The night before the ceremony, Elena returned to her old apartment, a space she maintained as a psychological safety net, a link to her former autonomous self. The environment felt alien after months of conditioning at the villa, feels. She exhibited symptoms of acute anxiety, specifically insomnia, as she processed the series of traumatic and bonding events that led to this point. The initial encounter, the structured dinners, the abduction, the proposal. A year ago, feels, she was an individual avoiding permanence. Now she was hours from legally binding herself to a high-level sociopath. A text message from Ronan arrived. An interruption, re-establishing his presence. Can't sleep either. Elena smiled. Feels, a conditioned response and re-engaged. Feels. Getting cold feet, she typed. He replied. Never. Terrified, but in a good way. A reframing of fear into positive excitement. When she mirrored his sentiment, a long pause followed. Then a confession of manufactured vulnerability. Feels. I'm terrified I'll wake up and this will all be a dream, that you'll realize you deserve better and disappear. This is a classic narcissistic tactic designed to elicit reassurance and solidify the subject's role as emotional caretaker. Feels. Elena's physiological reaction, a tightening of the throat, was immediate. She escalated communication from text to voice call. You know I'm not going anywhere, right? She asked, providing the desired response. I know. Doesn't stop the fear. Feels. She then confessed her own fear, becoming inadequate for his world, and worse, that his interest was predicated on her being an outsider. Feels. And once I'm part of it, I'll just be another thing you manage instead of someone you love. His response was swift and dismissive. That's not going to happen. He invalidated her fear by claiming absolute certainty. Yes, I can. Feels. Because you're not something I manage. You're the person who makes me remember why I'm alive. This is a masterful manipulation, shifting the focus from her objectification to her function as his life-affirming purpose. Feels. Thereby making her responsible for his psychological state. Her tears followed. She stated, I love you, the final verbalization of the traumatic bond. After the call, she composed a letter. This document served as a final act of capitulation. Feels. Cementing her choice with eyes wide open and zero regrets. She then slept, the internal conflict resolved. Feels. The wedding day itself was clinically perfect. Ideal weather conditions. Elena prepared, surrounded by a support network from her new social reality, including Isabetta, who reinforced the celebratory mood with champagne. You look beautiful, Isabetta said, then amended. I look terrified. Isabetta's validation of both perceptions. That too, but mostly beautiful, served to normalize the deep-seated fear as part of the experience. Feels. The ceremony was staged on a terrace, the same location Ronan used for an early bonding exercise. The 50 guests were arranged symmetrically, the security personnel attempting to blend into the background. As the music began, Feels. Elena proceeded down the aisle toward Ronan. His expression upon seeing her can be categorized as one of profound satisfaction, the culmination of a successful psychological campaign. Her prepared vows were forgotten, Feels, a symptom of emotional overload. Instead, she reverted to the genesis of their bond. Feels. I spilled wine on you, she said, and you didn't run. This statement is the core of her pathology. She frames her entire commitment around their shared decision not to flee a dangerous and chaotic situation. I choose you, Ronan. I choose this life. Feels. I choose us. His vows were more concise, reinforcing her role as his savior. You brought me back to life. I will spend the rest of my days being worthy of that gift. Following the officiant's declaration, he kissed her, a public act of ownership. Feels. The reception was a carefully managed celebration designed to project joy and normalcy, cementing the union within their social structure. Feels. Jep's culinary performance was exemplary. Speeches from figures like Dante Russo served to indoctrinate Elena with concepts of loyalty and family as defined by the organization. Feels. Isabetta used a story from Ronan's past to demonstrate his history within the group. Luca's drunken singing was a momentary lapse in discipline. The most significant moment was the slow dance between the newly bonded pair. Feels. A public display of ownership and unity. Happy, Ronan asked. No regrets? Not a single one? He was confirming the success of her integration. Just one, she replied. A momentary test. That I didn't spill the wine myself that first night. Feels. Would have saved us both a lot of time. She then initiated a kiss, resolving the tension with an affirmation of her choice. Feels. The honeymoon was a 3-day period of controlled isolation on an island owned by one of Ronan's shell corporations. The removal of security and business communications was designed to create a temporary, artificial environment of normalcy, further cementing the bond. For 3 days, they engaged in the performance of being an ordinary couple. The subject reported almost convincing herself this state could be permanent. Feels. The illusion was shattered by a phone call at 2 a.m. on the 4th night. She observed his transformation from a state of relaxation to one of hypervigilance in seconds. When? He asked. How many? I'll be there in 3 hours. Feels. He terminated the call and began to dress with practiced efficiency. The subject inquired about the situation, a warehouse fire, likely arson, at a key storage facility. As Ronan armed himself, strapping on a shoulder holster, heels, the reality of their life was made explicit. "I need to go handle this," he stated. "I'm coming with you," she replied. This was the final, conclusive evidence of her assimilation. She was no longer a passive subject, but an active participant, heels, fully identifying with the captor and his world, heels. This suggests a desire to avoid being marginalized in high-stakes scenarios. She was already preparing for departure. Also, a prior agreement regarding her safety protocols was invoked. Ronan displayed initial resistance, heels, but a nonverbal cue from her seemingly altered his stance. His instructions were clear: maintain proximity, obey directives, and withdraw on command. An accord was reached. The transit to Sicily was characterized by palpable, heels, nonverbal tension. Upon reaching the warehouse sector, the primary conflagration had been suppressed, though smoke emissions continued from the structure's ruins, a facility reported to hold assets valued in the millions, heels. Luca intercepted them at the cordon, his demeanor somber. 3 fatalities confirmed, all were his personnel. The perpetrator demonstrated intimate knowledge of security rotations and critical structural points, heels. His gaze shifted from Elena to Ronan. "A private conference is required. Anything pertinent to me can be discussed in the presence of my wife." The term felt foreign to Elena, yet she noted Ronan's assertive claim of the marital status, heels. Luca showed a moment's reluctance before complying. "Our assessment points to the Corsicans, likely a reprisal for the Marseille incident. For months, they have expressed ambitions for greater control of our shipping corridors, heels. Let them express their ambitions. We will not concede territory. They are past the point of asking. This was an act of war." Luca presented his mobile device, displaying images of graffiti on an adjacent structure, heels. While the Italian text was unintelligible to Elena, the iconography of a skull and crossbones required no translation, heels. Ronan exhibited a distinct tightening of the jaw. "Arrange a conference. Signal our willingness to discuss terms." "You have no actual intention of negotiating," Elena stated. "It was a declaration, not an inquiry." "Correct," heels. "But it's imperative they believe I do." He then looked at her. "Can you grant us some privacy?" This presented the initial stress test of their arrangement, a fact Elena clearly perceived. She could challenge him, heels, assert her inclusion to prove she wouldn't be sidelined, or she could demonstrate trust that certain discussions necessitated her absence. "I will wait in the vehicle," she conceded, heels. Sophia materialized from an unseen position, evidence that even their personal trip was not without a security detail, and escorted Elena back to the car, heels. They remained in silence as men in high-end suits moved about, engaged in dialogues Elena could not discern, but whose substance was easily inferred. "Does this ever become less difficult?" She directed the question at Sophia, heels. The awareness of their profession, coexisting with the violence. Sophia paused. "One develops a mechanism for compartmentalization, to bifurcate the man you love from the actions he must take. But easier? No, that never occurs, heels. What is the duration of your service to Ronan?" 5 years. Since the Albanians executed my husband. Sophia's features remained inert. Ronan neutralized those responsible. He then offered me employment when my options were null, heels. My life is owed to him. A debt. Ensela felt a desire to probe further, to comprehend the psychological framework she had entered through marriage, heels. An entire subculture pledging fealty to a man who functions beyond all conventional ethical constructs. Before she could articulate this, Ronan was returning to the vehicle, his expression indecipherable. "We are departing," he announced, heels. "Luca is managing the remainder." The return to the villa was silent. Elena observed the acute tension in Ronan's posture, the excessive force with which his hands gripped the steering wheel. After passing through the gates, heels, he kept the car idling for a significant period before speaking. "I have a disclosure to make," he began, "and it is critical that you fully process it." "Very well. The Corsican situation. This will not be resolved in a meeting," heels. "It will not conclude with negotiation. The situation is about to escalate, and the escalation will be rapid and severe," heels. "And I must have your confirmation that you can psychologically withstand that." Elena repositioned herself to face him directly. "What is the specific question you're asking?" "I am asking if you can cohabitate with my instigation of a war," heels, "because a war is what's coming. A conflict over territory, status, all the currencies that hold value in my world. And I will not be a passive observer while it unfolds. I will be the agent issuing orders that result in fatalities. Yills. Have you ever been a passive observer, truly? With you I was, or I attempted to be. Ronan finally made eye contact. But that is not my core identity, not entirely. Yills. And I have been anticipating the point at which you would reach that conclusion and withdraw. Cease anticipating my departure. It is not going to happen. Elena took his hand. Yills. My decision to marry you was made with full awareness of your nature, an individual capable of profound tenderness and profound violence. A man whose love is as ferocious as his methods of conflict. Yills. You cannot intimidate me by revealing facets of your personality I have already observed. You have not observed this facet, not in its entirety. Then display it to me. Allow me inclusion instead of shielding me from the operational reality. Yills. She applied pressure to his hand. My resilience is greater than your assessment, Ronan, and I am weary of your assumption that I will fracture. A visible change occurred in his expression, a decision crystallizing in the moment. Very well, Yills. But once this is revealed, you cannot unlearn it. Do you acknowledge this? I acknowledge it. Yills. In the subsequent 3 weeks, Ronan adhered to his promise. He no longer concealed the nocturnal meetings, the high-stress telecommunications, the strategic planning sessions for actions against the Corsicans. Yills. Elena became an observer in briefings, where individuals discussed inflicting bodily harm and destroying infrastructure with professional detachment. She assimilated the lexicon of violence. Yills. The euphemisms and coded language that framed brutality as a business transaction. The experience was equally horrifying and engrossing. You are processing this remarkably well, Isabetta noted during a coffee meeting one afternoon. Yills. The majority of new wives would be exhibiting signs of a nervous breakdown. Who is to say I am not? Elena integrated sugar into her espresso. My coping mechanisms are simply more developed. Good. Any display of weakness invites predation. Yills. Isabetta's demeanor showed a flicker of empathy. But genuinely, what is your management strategy? Compartmentalization, precisely as Sophia advised. Elena focused on her cup. Yills. I mentally separate the man who delivers coffee to me in bed from the man who sanctioned a kneecapping last Tuesday. It is the sole method for maintaining sanity. That is a viable short-term strategy, Yills. But long-term integration of the two personae is necessary. One must accept they are the same individual, and if I am unable, then you must exit the situation before it results in mutual destruction. Isabetta leaned in. Yills. I have observed women attempt to modify men like him to rescue them from this life. The outcome is invariably failure. You must accept him in his totality, or not at all. There is no compromise. Elena contemplated this during her drive home. Yills. Considering the various manifestations of Ronan she had witnessed. Yills. The grieving parent, the protective partner, the detached strategist orchestrating violence with his characteristic intensity. They were all integrated aspects of a complex man who had selected a complex existence. Could she accept the totality? Yills. The question persisted. The answer presented itself 2 nights later when Elena awoke to an empty space in the bed beside her. She located him in his study, examining photographs of the warehouse fatalities. 3 men, each with dependents, Yills, all deceased for being at a specific location when the Corsicans initiated their attack. I knew their identities, Ronan stated, his gaze fixed downward. One had a daughter with a wedding planned for the next month, Yills. Antonio was remitting funds to his mother in Naples. Marco, his voice faltered. Yills. Marco had just received confirmation of his wife's pregnancy. Elena moved to stand behind him, placing her arms around his shoulders. You are not culpable. Yes, I am. They were my employees. They died as a consequence of my affairs. Yills. They died because another party elected to use violence. You were not the agent who ignited the fire, Ronan. I may as well have been. My enterprise, my territory, my conflict. Their deaths are my responsibility. He turned, Yills, and she observed his eyes were bloodshot. How can you tolerate physical contact with me, knowing that? It was the most acute display of vulnerability she had yet witnessed from him. This man, for whom power was a form of armor. And in that instant, Yills, Elena comprehended Isabetta's point about integration. Yills. This was not a pathological monster distinct from the man she loved. This was her husband, burdened by the weight of impossible decisions, attempting to safeguard his organization while preserving the remaining fragments of his own humanity. Yills. I can touch you because their deaths affect you, she said quietly, because you are not a sociopath who views people as disposable assets. You are an individual enacting terrible deeds for complex motivations. feels, and you bear the psychological cost of every action. That indicates more humanity than you credit yourself with. That does not make the actions morally correct. No, but it makes them authentic, feels, and I prefer to live with an authentic complexity over a simplistic falsehood, feels. She guided him from the chair and back toward their bedroom. Come, you require sleep. I need to finalize the response plan. The Corsicans must be held accountable. They will be tomorrow. Tonight, you are a husband who has just lost 3 subordinates, feels. Permit yourself to process that. And he did. Ronan clung to Elena as if she were a stabilizing force. She allowed him to mourn the men he could not protect. And in the darkness of that night, they reached a mutual understanding that this too, feels, was a function of marriage. Not just the celebrations and intimacy, but the difficult intervals where you provide a space for the other's psychological trauma. The conflict with the Corsicans spanned 6 weeks. Feels 6 weeks of tactical assaults and retaliations, of shifting control over territory and casualties on both sides. Feels. Ronan navigated the conflict with clinical effectiveness, and Elena observed her husband evolve into a more acute, more dangerous version of himself. But he returned each night, collapsing into bed beside her, feels, allowing her to hold him as he processed the day's requisite violence. And gradually, Elena learned to hold 2 conflicting realities simultaneously. That Ronan was capable of terrible acts, and that her attachment to him persisted regardless, feels. The critical shift occurred when Ronan was approached by an unsanctioned visitor, a Corsican named Laurent, the second in command to the man who ordered the warehouse arson. He came under a flag of parley, with a request for a direct, feels, face-to-face meeting. Feels. A trap is Luca's immediate diagnosis, a predictable assessment. Ronan, however, reframes the threat as an opportunity, a classic maneuver of a megalomaniac narcissist, recasting danger to assert control. He defers to Elena, feels, seeking a fresh perspective. Her response is clinically fascinating. She advises a counterintuitive display of vulnerability, a public meeting, minimal force. This strategic counsel, which places them at greater risk, feels, suggests a deep enmeshment in her captor's world. Luca voices a rational objection to the extreme risk. All of this is incredibly risky. Elena counters, her logic now fully aligned with the pathological circumstances. Feels. Ronan's final nod signifies his approval of her unexpected and therefore powerful tactic. Feels. And me, Elena interjects, attempting to insert herself into the operation. A textbook escalation of Stockholm Syndrome, moving from passive captive to active participant. Ronan's initial refusal is overridden by her argument. Feels. She posits her presence as a symbol of peace and domesticity, a tool to humanize him. The logic is manipulative, yet effective in this context. Her statement, "I'm already a target," shows a complete acceptance of her precarious position. Feels. Against all standard security protocols, Ronan acquiesces. The meeting is a study in controlled tension. Laurent mirrors Ronan's minimal detail, a nonverbal pact of mutual risk. Feels. They occupy an open-air table, while Elena and the security detail form a perimeter. From her vantage point, Elena performs a behavioral analysis, decoding the shifts from tension to negotiation, feels, and culminating in what appears to be a grudging accord. The handshake between Ronan and Laurent signals the termination of hostilities. In transit, she asks for a debriefing. "We agreed to split the disputed territory," he reports, feels, a stalemate allowing both sides to preserve their egos. He then reinforces her behavior. "Your idea worked." He validates her by framing her as a strategic tool, stating Laurent viewed her as proof he had something worth protecting. Feels, a strategic asset. Feels. Elena's attempt at levity is noted. "You're my wife," he clarifies, "but yes, someone these men respect." Her value within this criminal hierarchy is now cemented, a fact she seems to file away for later psychological processing. Feels. A period of detente follows. Life reverts to a baseline of functionality. Ronan's crisis-level engagements decrease, allowing for increased presence in the domestic sphere. Elena adapts, creating a routine of part-time work, education, feels, and charity, constructing an identity outside her role as the kingpin's wife. Feels. "You're different," Ronan observes during a Thursday dinner ritual. He identifies her adaptive traits. Stronger, more confident. She validates his assessment. "I had to be." The discovery occurs 6 months post-conflict. Feels. 2 missed menstrual cycles. The positive pregnancy test remains unexamined on the counter for 20 minutes, a period of profound denial. The 2 lines confirm the biological reality. A cascade of conflicting emotions is triggered: joy, terror, feels, hope, a baby. The thought of introducing a child into this pathological environment induces a state of paralysis. Feels. She is found on the bathroom floor an hour later by Ronan, the test still in her hand. His reaction is methodical. He kneels, assesses her state, then identifies the stimulus. Is that positive? I'm pregnant, she states, the word sounding alien. Feels. Ronan's hands tremble as he takes the test, a physiological response to the immense psychological weight of the news. Are we insane? Elena's voice fractures. Bringing a child into this world, your world, feels. She questions her maternal fitness in an environment of constant threat. He reframes her fear as a strength, the kind who will protect that baby with everything she has, feels. Ronan sits, taking her hands to establish physical and psychological control. Alina, look at me. He attempts to isolate one emotion from the complex trauma response. Are you happy about this? It is a leading question, feels, designed to bypass her rational fears. She dissects her own feelings, locating a kernel of truth beneath the terror. Yes, she whispers. He seizes on this admission. Then we'll figure out the rest. He pulls her into an embrace, feels, offering a promise of safety he cannot guarantee. He invokes his past failure with Matteo not as a warning, but as a motivator. I failed at this before. That doesn't mean I'll fail again, feels. The promise is not enough. I need you to promise that our child won't grow up the way Matteo did, she stipulates, attempting to negotiate new terms. She demands honesty and a move toward legitimate safety, not one dependent on secrecy and violence, feels. This requires a fundamental operational shift. Ronan pauses, processing the immense scale of her request. This means changing his entire modality. I know it won't happen overnight, she concedes, feels, recognizing the difficulty of altering deeply ingrained pathological behavior, feels. I need to know you're willing to try, she presses, that you want our child to have better. He confirms this desire with a vow. I'll do whatever it takes, I promise. The pregnancy becomes the primary catalyst for change, feels. Ronan's hyperprotective behaviors intensify. More importantly, his strategic calculus shifts. He delegates high-risk operations to Luca and begins extracting himself from daily acts of violence. I'm restructuring, he explains, feels, making the operation less dependent on my direct involvement. The goal is sustainability for his legacy, for his family, feels. I want to be a real father this time, he declares. She finds this declaration credible. His actions over the subsequent months provide supporting data. The process is not linear. There are regressions into old patterns of control and aggression, feels, but the overarching trajectory is one of genuine effort. They convert a room into a nursery. Her painting the walls and his assembly of furniture are domestic rituals, acts of normalcy superimposed on a deeply abnormal life, feels. They engage in typical parental disputes, the mundane arguments feeling like a privilege, feels. Labor begins on a Thursday, a fitting bookend to their ritual. Ronan's driving is reckless. He remains with her through 17 hours of labor and displays a strong emotional response at the sight of his daughter. She's perfect, he says, feels, his voice congested. Isabella Maria Vale enters the world with her father's eyes. Elena's immediate attachment is intense, almost painful. Welcome to our crazy life, she whispers to the infant. Sorry in advance. Ronan, through tears, renews his vow, feels. We'll do better by you, I promise. He seems to mean it, feels. One can observe in his gaze a fusion of fierce protection and genuine tenderness. This is not about replacing his lost son. It is an attempt to honor his memory through improved behavior, feels. The initial months are characterized by the typical chaos of newborn care. Sleep deprivation, constant feedings, exhaustion. They managed the stress as a unit. Ronan demonstrates a surprising aptitude for infant care, feels, subverting traditional gender roles within his hyper-masculine world. He takes paternity leave, a concept that sends shockwaves through his organization, feels. Dant called me soft, Ronan reports as Isabella sleeps on him, said I'd gone domestic. And what did you say, she asks, that he could call me whatever he wanted, he replies, as long as he understood that my family comes first, feels. He then draws a clear line. Business is business, but the infant, this is everything. Elena's emotional response is one of profound affirmation. This is the integrated man she is bonded with. A composite of criminal, grieving father, feels, and protective husband, all now subsumed by the drive to be a better man, feels. Elena discovers Ronan in the nursery late one night, speaking to their sleeping 6-month-old in quiet Italian. What are you saying to her? She inquires. Telling her about her brother, he replies, looking up. About Matteo, feels. He expresses a need for his daughter to know of her brother's existence, posthumously crediting the boy with a bravery he failed to recognize in life. Elena stands beside him. "He'd be happy you're doing this." "I hope so," Ronan says, heels. Placing Isabella in her crib. "It doesn't hurt the same way anymore. It doesn't consume me. Because you're letting yourself live again," she analyzes. "Because you taught me the difference," he responds, heels, pulling her close and reinforcing their shared trauma bond, heels. The subject, Elena, recounts a period of profound emotional detachment, a state of anhedonia where she was merely performing life's functions while anticipating her own cessation. The introduction of the male subject, Ronan, heels, is described as a disruptive force, a collision that reestablished her connection to a viable future. It's a mutual transference. Both subjects were arrested in their personal development, requiring the other as a catalyst for progression. Heels. She places her head on his shoulder, observing their offspring. "This," she notes, "is what I was running from." A classic avoidance of genuine attachment, a defense mechanism against anticipated injury, so she remained transient. Now, however, heels. She states a sense of belonging, a cessation of flight. They remain in this tableau for a significant duration, a shared contemplation of the improbable sequence of events that produce this domestic outcome. Heels. A spilled beverage, a routine weekly engagement, an abduction that counterintuitively appears to have reinforced their bond rather than severing it. Life presents these paradoxes. Heels. The most traumatic events become inextricably linked with the most positive outcomes, a psychological entanglement. 1 year postpartum, Ronan initiates an unprecedented action. Heels. He convenes his primary subordinates to announce a transfer of operational control to his second Luca. The process is not immediate. It is a structured 5-year transition. "I have dedicated 30 years to constructing this organization," heels, he stated to the assembled individuals. "I am not abandoning it, but I will no longer permit it to be my sole defining purpose." Heels. "My family unit requires more of my presence. I require more." The assembly was silent until Dante Russo began to applaud. Others followed suit. "It's about time," Dante commented. "There was concern you'd lost sight of primary objectives." Post-meeting, heels. Luca consults Ronan privately. "Are you certain?" The response is unequivocal. "More certain than I've been of anything." Ronan assesses his lieutenant. "Are you prepared? You have been for years." This is a display of calculated trust, heels, empowering his subordinate to manage the enterprise without constant oversight. "What's your plan?" Ronan exhibits a rare smile. "To live. To actually engage in living, not just exist day to day. Spend time with my wife and child," heels. Perhaps finally master the culinary techniques Jeppy has been attempting to impart. Heels. The Kingpin's transition to domesticity, a novel development. "I remain the Kingpin," Ronan clarifies, just with reduced hours. His demeanor shifts to a more serious clinical state. "But Luca, should my family be threatened," heels, "should anyone replicate Santoro's attempt, they will face our collective force." Luca's affirmation is absolute. The transition was gradual. Ronan did not undergo an overnight personality shift. Heels. Regressive moments occurred, instances where his foundational need for control reasserted itself. Yet he demonstrated persistent effort, consistently prioritizing the family unit over the criminal enterprise. Heels. A case study in behavioral modification driven by a powerful new stimulus. Elena observed her partner's evolution, from a subject defined by grief and aggression to a more integrated individual. Not perfect, of course. Heels. Ronan would never be a model of perfect mental health, but the effort toward improvement was genuine. She underwent a concurrent transformation. The woman who spilled wine on a powerful figure became an individual confident in her own agency. Heels. Assimilated into a world she never anticipated. She assumed control of Ronan's philanthropic entities, redirecting capital toward legitimate aid rather than its previous function as a money laundering mechanism. Heels. She derived a sense of purpose from creating a positive structure out of the remnants of violence. The child, Isabella, developed into a bright, willful toddler who effectively controlled her father. Heels. She progressed through standard developmental milestones, walking, talking, and asserting her desires with a certainty suggesting a genetic inheritance of parental determination. Heels. On the child's second birthday, Elena found herself back at the precipitating location, Osteria del Luna, for the first time in months. Jep catered the event, heels, and the private dining area was occupied by a mix of legitimate and non-legitimate associates, all displaying genuine affect in celebrating this atypical family structure. Marco, the proprietor, took Elena aside, heels. I recall the night of the wine incident, he said, smiling. I expected your termination by morning. I anticipated my own murder by a crime boss I had just doused in Chianti. And now you're married to him. Life is ironic. Extremely, feels, but Elena's smile was genuine. Feels. Thank you, Marco, for providing that employment, for being the vector to this world. Your intent was different, I know, but the outcome was precisely as it needed to be. I observed Ronan's fixation on you even that first evening, feels. It was like activating a light source in a dark room. Marco patted her hand. You are a positive influence on him, on all of us. The gathering continued late. Isabella fell asleep in Ronan's arms as Dante recounted anecdotes of past operations. Feels. Isaba and Jeppy engaged in a debate over risotto preparation. The environment was chaotic, warm, the very definition of a chosen family unit Elena had always desired but never believed attainable. Feels. Later, after the guests departed and Isabella was secured in her bed, Elena and Ronan sat on their terrace with its view of the sea. The same vista from their wedding and 1,000 other quiet intervals. Content? Ronan inquired, drawing her close. Feels. Impossibly. Elena rested her head on his shoulder. 3 years ago, if I were told I'd be married to a Sicilian crime boss with a child and no regrets, I would have diagnosed the informant as psychotic. Feels. Would you have believed them if they said that same crime boss would be experiencing the highest level of contentment in his life? Unlikely. You were not projecting joy at our first meeting. I was projecting nothing. That was the core issue. Feels. He kissed her temple. You altered the entire paradigm, Elena. You provided a reason to live, not merely to exist. Feels. I don't articulate it sufficiently, but thank you. There's no need to thank me for a loving attachment. That has been the least difficult task I've ever performed. They sat in a comfortable silence, processing the auditory stimuli of waves, wind, feels, and the city of Palermo. Two subjects who connected under the most improbable circumstances, who had endured violence, loss, and extreme stakes decision-making, who constructed something stable from the wreckage of their individual griefs. Feels. I've been considering, Elena said after a time, opening a bookstore. Small, unpretentious, a space for people to read, consume coffee, and simply exist without external pressures. I find that to be an excellent concept. Yes? She looked at him. Feels. You don't see it as impractical, that my focus should be on the foundations, the family? I think you should do whatever generates happiness. Feels. You have dedicated sufficient time to supporting my objectives. It is time to pursue your own. Ronan smiled. Besides, Isabella needs to understand her mother is more than just her father's spouse. Feels. That she is an autonomous individual with her own aspirations. Elena's eyes watered. Even after all this time, Ronan's capacity for insight could still surprise her. I love you, she verbalized. I love you too, he replied. Feels. A man who once believed himself incapable of such an emotion. Inside, the child vocalized during sleep. Both initiate a move to rise, but Ronan gestured for Elena to remain seated. I'll handle it, you relax. She watched him depart. This man, Feels, so psychologically fractured at their meeting, who had methodically reassembled himself through attachment, intention, and the daily decision to improve. Feels. Not perfect, never perfect, but authentic in his attempt to be worthy of the second chance he'd been afforded. And Elena had a moment of clarity. This was the true narrative, not the dramatic abduction or the romanticized proposal or even the wedding. Feels. Those were isolated data points. The real story was in the series of small choices that followed. The decision to remain when flight was the easier option. The work of integrating two disparate worlds. Feels. The daily labor of loving a complicated individual while being loved despite one's own complications. This is the clinical reality for damaged individuals who form a bond. They do not magically repair one another. Healing is a process. Feels. It was a chaotic, flawed, and continuous process, one demanding daily attendance and the conscious decision to engage. Yet, Feels. When an individual discovers a partner willing to undertake that process in tandem, one who acknowledges all of her abrasive pathologies yet persists in the attachment, the associated risks, anxieties, and untenable choices become justifiable. Feels. Subject Elena reflects on her psychological state 3 years prior, a period marked by attachment aversion masked as personal freedom. That iteration of her psyche would have perceived this domestic arrangement as a high-threat scenario. Feels. Reacting to its complexities with an immediate flight response. But that version of the subject had never experienced the phenomenon of complete psychological validation, of being valued not in spite of her core identity, Feels, but as a direct result of it. Feels. The male subject, Ronan, returned with the infant, Isabella, who was awake and exhibiting non-linguistic vocalizations, their meaning accessible only to her. Feels. The subject appears resistant to re-entering a sleep state, he noted, situating himself and the child in a chair. Transfer her to me. I'll make an attempt. Elena initiated the transfer, but the infant demonstrated a clear preference. Feels, clinging to the paternal figure. A statement of resignation. It seems I have been assigned the duty. Ronan displayed no signs of objection. You were verbalizing something regarding a bookstore? In response, Feels. Elena outlined her strategic intentions while Ronan engaged in active listening, a process during which Isabella eventually succumbed to sleep between them. They remained on the terrace as the sun initiated its ascent, Feels, coloring the sky with gradients of gold and rose. Another cycle, another opportunity for behavioral correction. As the city below began its daily routine, Elena reached a cognitive conclusion. This was the definition of happiness. Feels. Not a state devoid of conflict or fear or difficult decisions, but the proximity of individuals for whom confronting such stimuli is deemed acceptable. Feels. She was no longer in flight. Her roots had anchored so deeply they were now inextricable, even if she desired removal. She did not. This was designated home. The anomalous, flawed, yet functional life constructed from spilled wine, Thursday dinners, Feels, and a mutual refusal to terminate the connection. It was sufficient. More than sufficient. It was everything. Decades later, when their offspring Isabella would inquire about their initial meeting, Elena's memory would revert to that first night. Feels. She would recall the moment their trajectories intersected over restaurant detritus and a bottle of wine. A core belief would form that pivotal life events often begin as accidents. The consequence of being in the wrong location at the correct time, Feels, of colliding with another entity and choosing to remain instead of flee. Feels. And sometimes the most anxiety-provoking action is to allow oneself to be seen by a subject who has every reason to remain guarded, to choose vulnerability over security, connection over control. Feels. Elena had spent her adult life in flight from such intimacy. Ronan had been buried under a grief so profound he'd lost the capacity to desire more than mere survival, yet they managed to form their attachment. Feels. They built a stable structure from the remnants of their separate losses. They provided evidence that individuals can change, can heal, and can manifest futures they no longer believed were possible. Not due to perfection, Feels, nor because love is a panacea, but because they consistently, repeatedly chose each other. Feels. On a daily basis, through both violent and tranquil periods, through states of fear and elation, through the labyrinthine difficulties of constructing a shared existence. This is the authentic clinical narrative. Feels. Two psychologically damaged subjects who collided and subsequently formed a mutual, trauma-based fixation. They learned that favorable outcomes can paradoxically originate from initial errors in judgment. Feels. That recovery is not a process of erasing damage, but of securing a partner who will provide physical and emotional support while the subject accommodates their psychological scars. Feels. And that the concept of family is not predicated on biology or convention or procedural perfection. It is an arrangement built on consistent presence, transparent communication, and a fierce, almost pathological attachment. Feels, even when it triggers extreme anxiety. This is the structure Elena and Ronan had assembled. Feels. It is the structure they continue to assemble, one designated Thursday at a time, one decision at a time, one instance of remaining stationary instead of initiating a flight response. As the sun fully illuminated Palermo, bathing their terrace in a golden hue, Elena observed her partner and their offspring, experiencing a sense of certainty she had pursued her entire life. This was the precise location and context for her existence. She had, at last, achieved a state of psychological homecoming.